Before the summer of 1988, the Carr family enjoyed a happy life in the small town of Alturas. They were known for their strong faith and attended church every Sunday, embodying a peaceful, trouble-free family. However, their calm life was disrupted on June 14th when 17-year-old Dwayne found a threatening letter in their mailbox. The anonymous note was alarming, warning the family to leave Florida or face serious consequences. Distressed, Dwayne quickly showed the letter to his parents. His mother, Peggy, was filled with fear, while his father, Pi, dismissed it as a prank. As summer transitioned into fall, the family's anxiety increased, peaking on October 23rd when Peggy suddenly became seriously ill. She suffered from intense nausea and severe pain, and strikingly, her hair began to fall out in large clumps. Despite her worsening condition, Pi insisted on not taking Peggy to the hospital, thinking it was just a temporary illness. However, Peggy's health rapidly deteriorated, and within a week, she fell into a coma. To make matters worse, Dwayne started showing the same troubling symptoms as his mother. This alarming situation led to a police investigation. On December 2nd, authorities made a shocking discovery. The sickness affecting the Carr family was caused by thallium, a deadly chemical often used in rat poison. Tests revealed that every family member, including Pi, had dangerously high levels of this poison in their bodies. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that someone was deliberately targeting the Carr family. The letter they received was not a joke. It was a warning of the danger ahead. Authorities now had to work quickly to identify the person responsible and prevent further harm. Turn back time. In 1988, Dwayne was happily living with his family in the peaceful town of Alturas, Florida. His mother, Peggy, worked hard as a waitress at a local diner. After raising 3 children by herself, she found love with Pi Carr, who had 2 children of his own, creating a blended family. Life in Alturas seemed perfect. It was a quiet place where people left their doors unlocked, ideal for raising a family. However, on October 23rd, everything changed in a tragic way. Early in the morning, Peggy went to work as usual. However, shortly after arriving at the diner, she began experiencing a burning sensation in her legs and feet, followed by severe chest pain. She was quickly taken to the hospital, where her condition left her nearly incapacitated. Despite extensive tests, doctors were unable to determine the cause of her symptoms and sent her home with pain relief medication. A week later, on October 30th, Peggy and Dwayne, along with Dwayne's stepbrother, Travis, were taken to the hospital with severe symptoms. The pain was so intense that they were brought to tears, and they were scared for their lives. Peggy was admitted to the intensive care unit, where an infectious disease specialist noticed something troubling, suggesting possible poisoning. He decided to test for thallium, a toxic substance banned in the U.S. since 1972, but still found in some old rat poisons. The test results were shocking. Peggy had 50 times the deadly amount of thallium in her body. The following day, October 31st, she fell into a coma. Travis needed a respirator, and Dwayne showed no signs of getting better. The police quickly started an investigation with a clear goal: to identify the source of the poisoning and prevent more harm. They searched the orange groves, tested the neighborhood's water supply, and even investigated the diner where Peggy worked, but found no signs of thallium. As news broke, panic spread through the community. Concerned citizens demanded answers, anxious about their safety. Investigators arrived at the Carr home, carefully collecting dust samples and over 400 household items for testing. One item of particular concern was a 6-pack of Coke bottles, 3 of which were unopened. Tests showed that each bottle contained more than a gram of thallium, enough to be lethal to an adult. The lead detective understood that there were 2 possible explanations. Either the Coke had been tampered with at the factory, or it had been contaminated elsewhere. If it was factory tampering, many more people might have consumed the poison, potentially affecting not just the county, but the entire state or even the nation. This fear led locals to hesitate before drinking Coke. The investigation initially targeted the bottling company. However, thanks to Coca-Cola's cooperation, it was quickly determined that large-scale tampering was not possible. It was found that tampering with the product at the plant could not physically happen. As a result, the police concluded that this was a deliberate attack on Peggy Carr and her family. The investigation focused on family members, with Peggy's husband, Pi Carr, becoming a key suspect. Although they had been married for just 7 months, their initial happiness had faded quickly. Pi spent long hours working at the mine, which made Peggy increasingly suspicious of him. One night, she caught him with another woman, further deepening her concerns. During the weekend that Peggy became ill, Pi happened to be out of town. When he returned, he was reluctant to take her to the hospital. As investigators looked further into Pi's past, they tried to find a reason why he would poison his wife. However, one question continued to trouble the police. Why would Pi also poison his own son, Travis? During the interrogation, Pi shared an intriguing piece of information. On June 14th, 4 months before Peggy got sick, Dwayne discovered a letter in the mailbox. Inside, there was a yellow post-it note with a typewritten warning telling the family to leave Florida within 2 weeks or they would face death. At first, Dwayne and his siblings found it funny, but now Pi's lack of concern appeared more suspicious. The police discovered that unsettling events had previously occurred in the Carr household. A few years earlier, 2 of their dogs had died unexpectedly, showing signs of severe illness and hair loss. This raised a disturbing possibility that they might have been subjected to experimentation. As Peggy's condition worsened, Dwayne and Travis showed no signs of getting better. The entire family was tested for thallium. The results were shocking. Every family member, including Pi Carr, had trace amounts of thallium in their system. This finding ruled Pi out as a suspect, since it seemed unlikely that someone would commit such a crime while also risking their own exposure to the poison. Even Peggy's 2-year-old granddaughter, Casey, had traces of thallium. On March 3, 1989, after 5 months of suffering, Peggy's health took a tragic turn for the worse. Dwayne was summoned to her bedside one last time as the family made the painful decision to take her off life support. Peggy Carr passed away at the age of 41, leaving her family in deep sorrow. Peggy's death shifted the investigation to a murder case. Poisoning is an unusual and deliberate method of killing, typically associated with a particularly clever and disturbed individual. When the FBI examined the contaminated Coke bottles, they discovered tiny scratch marks, suggesting that the bottles had been carefully altered. Thallium had been added, the caps resealed, and the bottles looked untouched. Since thallium is both tasteless and odorless, it dissolves easily without leaving typical signs like overflow, discoloration, or sediment in soda. The careful mixture found in the Coke bottles indicates that the perpetrator possessed advanced chemistry knowledge, an exceptionally intelligent person who thought they were more cunning than everyone else. Police began to interview neighbors and townspeople in Alturas, a small community with only a few hundred residents, as they searched for the person responsible for this terrible crime. The closest neighbors to the Carr family were George James Trepal and his wife, Diana. When detectives questioned Trepal, he reacted with surprising anger, criticizing the redneck children and family living nearby. When asked who anyone would want to harm the Carr family, George gave a disturbingly detailed answer. He believed someone wanted them to move away. This was exactly the same message found in a threatening letter sent to the Carrs, a detail known only to the police. This unusual response led investigators to consider Trepal as a prime suspect. Further investigation revealed that George was a self-taught chemist, while his wife, Diana, held a master's degree in chemistry. Both were part of an elite society for individuals with an IQ in the top 2% of the population. Investigators then uncovered George's criminal history. He had previously served time in prison for his role as the chemist in a large methamphetamine operation. One key ingredient used in making methamphetamine is thallium. The news that George was a person of interest surprised even Peggy's son, Dwayne, who found it hard to believe that Treple was capable of such a terrible crime. The detectives found out that Treple had a prior altercation with the Carr family over loud music. Just 2 days after this dispute, Peggy Carr was poisoned. Although there were connections between the two events, the police did not have sufficient evidence to arrest Treple. Typically, police procedures involve questioning a suspect in hopes of securing a confession. However, detectives felt this tactic would not be effective with Treple, who is introverted and avoids confrontation. Therefore, the FBI suggested an alternative approach. Someone needed to go undercover to outwit Treple. The police assigned Special Agent to go undercover in the group that George Treple was part of. The goal was to earn Treple's trust and collect enough evidence to demonstrate his involvement in the poisoning. At first, it appeared that the agent would only need to work undercover for a weekend. However, she was cautioned about Treple's exceptional memory. If he saw her, he might remember her face or car. She, using a fake identity, was getting ready to attend a murder mystery event organized by George Treple and his wife, Diana. She pretended to be a woman about to divorce her abusive husband. On April 14, 1989, she arrived at the local hotel where the gathering was taking place. As she entered, she was met by George himself. Seeing him, she felt anxious that he might recognize her from previous surveillance. She took a deep breath and looked for any indication that he knew her, but Treple didn't seem to remember her. Still, she had to stay alert in her undercover role. She understood that Treple was not likely to confront someone directly. He preferred to poison his victims, leading to a slow and painful death. The agent signed up for the event and received a packet with all the weekend details prepared by Treple himself. The pamphlet outlined several carefully crafted murder scenarios, including one that involved poisoning. One paragraph caught her attention. It stated that when a death threat arrives, cautious individuals should discard all their food and be mindful of what they consume. This alarming similarity reminded she of the death threat the Carr family had received just before Peggy was poisoned, reinforcing her belief that they had identified the right suspect. Throughout the weekend, the agent spoke with Treple, carefully monitoring his every word, aware that any mistake could cost her life. When Treple inquired about her background, she fabricated a story about her husband, a lawyer from Houston, Texas, whom she claimed to have left. Treple revealed that he could detect lies by observing the movement of a person's neck muscles, which made she even more anxious. Before the weekend concluded, she revealed to Treple her plan to move to Florida in order to escape her husband. This confession led to an important development. Treple mentioned that he and his wife were considering relocating their practice and selling their house. After meeting with her supervisors, the agent was told to extend her undercover operation beyond the original weekend. She recognized this as an opportunity to gather important evidence that could lead to a search warrant for Treple's house. Her goal was to find lab equipment or chemicals that would connect Treple to the crime. The next week, she visited Treple's house. During the visit, Treple bragged about how safe Alturas was and how nobody locked their doors. While she spotted several suspicious items, such as a secret passage in the library and a mannequin dressed in bondage gear, none of these were enough to obtain a search warrant. Despite her failed plan, the agent continued to act, committed to collecting more evidence. She understood the dangers involved. Revealing her real identity could put her and her family at risk. Treple, who was very clever, might resort to poisoning her if he found out she was an undercover detective. Over the next few months, she met with Treple for several lunch dates, always being watched closely. She avoided eating or drinking anything after leaving the table, cautious of Treple's potential to harm her. During these meetings, Treple progressively showed his contempt for those he deemed less intelligent, which provided she with a glimpse into his mindset. After 8 months, the agent had gathered many small pieces of evidence, but it wasn't enough to form a strong case. Her supervisors started to doubt the operation's worth and considered shutting it down. For the agent, giving up was not an option. She felt a deep responsibility to seek justice for Peggy Carr and her family. Thinking about how it could have been her own loved ones who ingested the poison. In December 1989, the agent received an important call she had been anticipating. George and Diana Trepal had relocated and offered her the opportunity to move into their home. With this offer, the agent gained legal permission to enter the house without needing a warrant, allowing her to invite the county crime scene unit to conduct an investigation. Suspecting that Trepal was too intelligent to leave obvious signs of thallium, the investigation team concentrated on searching for residues in areas such as the air conditioning filter and drains. The house still contained many of Trepal's belongings, which provided plenty of chances to collect samples. In the garage, investigators found vials and chemistry bottles, hoping that one of them would test positive for thallium. While waiting for results from the FBI lab, the agent struggling to come up with new ways to engage Trepal. As time passed, she realized that by January 1990, with no updates from the lab, she needed to take matters into her own hands. She aimed to trick Trepal into incriminating himself, not knowing that he was preparing his own deception. The agent scheduled a meeting with Trepal at a picnic area behind a McDonald's, near where he lived. This important meeting was recorded. During their discussion, she gave Trepal a business card that she claimed had been left by detectives looking for him. Trepal reacted noticeably. He became very anxious and visibly unsettled as he tried to stay calm. He repeatedly invited she to visit his new house, but she declined. The atmosphere was tense, leaving one to wonder what would have happened if she had accepted his invitation. After the meeting, Trepal appeared visibly shaken and deeply impacted by the news from her. This marked a critical moment in the investigation. On April 4, 1990, the agent received an unexpected phone call. The FBI had found thallium in one of the vials taken from Trepal's garage. The vial contained thallium nitrate, the same chemical used to poison Peggy Carr and to try to kill her entire family. This discovery provided crucial evidence to bolster the case against Trepal. On April 5th, George Trepal was arrested at his new home in Seguin. Seeing him led into the county jail in an orange jumpsuit marked the conclusion of a lengthy and dangerous investigation. Even when the agent revealed her true identity, Trepal remained calm. The special agent from the county sheriff's office presented him with a warrant for handwriting samples, to which Trepal simply smiled and said, "Oh, okay." She had narrowly escaped becoming Trepal's next victim. In January 1991, George Trepal's trial began with substantial evidence against him. Police found a journal in Trepal's home called General Poisoning Guides, which identified thallium as a common poison used by criminals. The journal included references to harming neighbors, and 55 fingerprints found in it matched Trepal's. The prosecution also presented the tools used to tamper with the Coke bottles, including a set of tiny screwdrivers. One screwdriver was missing and fit perfectly with the marks on the bottle caps, which was incriminating evidence that shocked the jury. Throughout the trial, Trepal maintained a calm and emotionless demeanor, even smiling at times. His lack of remorse and his premeditated actions revealed a disturbing level of malice. He rationalized his cruel actions by claiming he was more intelligent than others and believed that those he deemed less intelligent did not have the right to live. The trial lasted for 2 months, but the jury took only 4 hours to reach a decision. On March 6, 1991, nearly 2 years after Peggy Carr's death, George Trepal was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death. According to the Florida Department of Corrections, inmates on death row wait an average of 12.7 years for execution. Trepal passed that milestone nearly 8 years ago. With this verdict, justice was served for Peggy Carr. The special agent's unwavering dedication and bravery played a crucial role in bringing this criminal to justice. She put her life at risk to ensure that Trepal was held accountable for his horrific actions. Reflecting on her commitment, one can't help but admire her courage. She went above and beyond to ensure that Peggy's killer faced justice, earning the respect and gratitude of many. The other members of Peggy Carr's family, who also experienced poisoning, fully recovered. However, the loss of Peggy deeply affected her son Dwayne. Losing his mother at just 16 years old was a traumatic event that left him with lasting emotional pain. In the years after her passing, Dwayne struggled with his grief, frequently expressing it through anger and emotional outbursts. Eventually, he discovered comfort in writing letters to his mother, where he shared his feelings. He promised to work on improving his life. Dwayne fulfilled his promise. Today, he is married and is the supportive father his family needs. Each day, he works hard to make his mother proud and honor her memory. Dwayne exemplifies the strength of the human spirit, proving that even after facing great tragedy, it is possible to live a meaningful life. It was a quiet December night. The children were asleep, and the house was peaceful. However, something terrible was happening behind a closed door. By the next day, Lindsay Quay had disappeared. There were no phone calls, no notes, just silence and a strange account from the man who lived with her. Initially, no one knew what to make of it, but as time went on, the truth began to emerge. What really occurred that night in Southport? Lindsay Wilson was born in the seaside town of Southport, near Liverpool. As one of 6 children, in a loving and supportive family, Lindsay flourished in the caring environment provided by her parents. She had a strong bond with her siblings, especially her brother, Peter Wilson, who was just a year older. They shared laughter, secrets, and close friendships. Lindsay had a magnetic personality that attracted others, radiating energy, compassion, and joy. Her life changed dramatically in 1995. Lindsay had first become involved with Mitchell Quay when she was 17 and pregnant by another man. Her brother introduced them. He worked with Mitchell at a local casino. What started as a promising relationship quickly escalated into a passionate romance. Within a week, they were engaged, and just weeks later, they were married. However, the celebration was muted. Mitchell's family was largely absent from the wedding, with only his brother, Elliot Quay, present. On that same day, Lindsay's father witnessed their first argument, a troubling sign of the difficulties that lay ahead, although no one could have anticipated just how severe their challenges would become. Mitchell grew up in Essex, but relocated to Southport as a teenager after the tragic loss of his mother, with a father frequently absent for work and a younger brother to look after. Mitchell had to mature quickly and face life on his own. This hardship transformed into a more troubling side of his character. In the early stages of his marriage, Mitchell's initial charm disappeared, revealing a harsh and unyielding personality. He became possessive and unpredictable, insisting that everything go his way. Lindsay, who had hoped for a stable life, now felt completely trapped. 6 weeks after the wedding, Lindsay's daughter, Robin, was born. Mitchell began to disappear for days at a time, leaving Lindsay and Robin while he pursued affairs and wild nights. When he returned, he brought roses and offered apologies. This created a cycle of abuse that only grew tighter. Desperate to hold on to the man she once loved, Lindsay repeatedly forgave him. However, each forgiveness made her feel more diminished. Mitchell's control over her became more deceptive. He started to distance her from everyone important in her life, friends, siblings, and even her father, who had always been her protector. Gradually, he made himself the sole influence in her life. Lindsay found herself increasingly isolated, with every escape route blocked by the man who claimed to love her. 18 months after they married, Lindsay sought to escape her situation and turned to a local support center for single mothers, where she found a place to live. For a short time, she felt some relief. However, Mitchell tracked her down, filled with apologies, promises, and tears, which led them back into the same toxic cycle. Lindsay returned home, and soon after, she became pregnant again, hoping this new start might bring change. She approached her pregnancy with quiet determination. She might have believed that the baby could transform Mitchell. Victims of abuse often suffer from misplaced guilt, feeling as though they triggered the pain they endure. Unfortunately, nothing improved. Lindsay's mum reveals she stopped visiting her daughter because she didn't want to see Mitchell, and that the last time she saw her was on December 13th. On Christmas Eve, Mitchell visited Mrs. Wilson to collect the children's presents and told her that Lindsay was getting ready to go out. While the family felt uncomfortable, they weren't overly worried, as her absence had started to feel normal. However, as the holidays went by, without any news from Lindsay, their concern grew stronger. It was 6 weeks before a social worker reported her missing. Due to Lindsay's history of domestic abuse, the police responded quickly. Mitchell claimed that Lindsay had left just before Christmas, when she packed her bags and walked away, never to return. He insisted that she was an adult capable of making her own choices. However, both Lindsay's family and investigators found his account suspicious and doubted his statements. By April the following year, police discovered Mitchell had been withdrawing benefits in Lindsay's name. They arrested him on suspicion of murder, solicitation to cause grievous bodily harm, and fraud. Although he downplayed the seriousness of his actions, his comments unsettled those who heard them. He stated he wouldn't even help her if she were in danger after what she did to him and the kids. As time went on, suspicions about Mitchell intensified. He appeared completely untroubled and showed no signs of sadness. He gave interviews, portraying himself as a victim who had been deserted. However, investigators weren't fooled by his performance. They suspected that Lindsay never left the house alive, but they lacked evidence, no body, no confession, and no clear proof. The central question was, where was Lindsay Quay? While Lindsay's family desperately searched for her, Mitchell seemed to enjoy being in the spotlight. With cameras rolling and reporters watching, he presented himself not as a grieving partner, but as someone who thrived on the attention. Mitchell even sent the detective a Christmas card with a bottle of hair dye and a note telling him to get rid of the gray hair to feel more confident. He reported to the authorities that he had seen Lindsay around town, specifically near shops, and in a black Mercedes with another man. He insisted she was nearby and that he could recognize her, yet no one else ever spotted her. He depicted himself as a victim of suspicion rather than tragedy. His statements were inconsistent and lacked any evidence to support them. Despite thorough forensic investigations, no conclusive evidence was found in the home he had shared with Lindsay. Investigators did discover significant purchases of cleaning supplies, which raised concerns, but without a body or evidence of wrongdoing. The case has reached a standstill. While Mitchell misled the media and law enforcement, Lindsay's family faced overwhelming silence. Her father, Peter, spearheaded a persistent search for her. He distributed flyers throughout neighborhoods to seek help and to confront Mitchell with Lindsay's image daily. He scoured canals, ditches, and muddy woods, holding on to hope but increasingly feeling despair. Peter suspected Mitchell was involved, but without a body, a confession, or any closure, he was left with grief and unanswered questions. Each week, Peter confronted a terrifying reality as he picked up his grandchildren from the man he believed killed his daughter. He maintained a calm voice and neutral expression, but beneath his composed facade was an anger he struggled to contain for Lindsay, for her children, and for the elusive truth. A pivotal moment occurred on June 9th, several months after Lindsay went missing, when police officially declared her dead. On the same day, they arrested Mitchell for her murder. During police questioning, he declined to provide any information, repeating the phrase "no comment." The evidence against him was weak, just bits of circumstantial evidence and a pattern of troubling behavior. Then, unexpectedly, after only one night in custody, Mitchell confessed. He revealed that he had killed Lindsay on December 16, 1998. That evening, they argued in their bedroom, just steps away from where their 2 young children were sleeping. Lindsay allegedly said she wanted a divorce. Mitchell grabbed her by the neck and held her to the floor for 20 minutes. He then placed her body in the bedroom and sealed the door with a towel to prevent her 2 children from smelling the corpse. In the following 48 hours, Mitchell committed a horrifying act. In the attic of their family home, he dismembered Lindsay's body. He didn't do this alone. His brother Elliot, who had previously worked in a butcher shop, assisted him. Police believe Elliot's experience helped minimize evidence and avoid mistakes. Elliot Quay was not known for being independent. Investigators described him as having limited cognitive abilities and likely needing special care. His life centered around his older brother, Mitchell, who had a significant influence on him. Unfortunately, this influence led Elliot into a dark situation. After confessing to a murder, Mitchell guided investigators to where he had hidden the remains of Lindsay. The discoveries were disturbing. Miss Kwai's dismembered body was found in a shallow grave near a roller coaster at Pleasureland in the seaside resort of Southport, Merseyside. Her arms and legs were later found wrapped in plastic bags in separate places on a railway embankment. A bin bag containing her head and hands, believed to have been buried in 200,000 tons of rubbish at a Lancashire landfill site, has never been recovered. One disturbing detail emerged during the investigation. Mitchell likely disposed of Lindsay's remains while out walking with his children. This cold and calculated approach, using casual outings as a disguise, was both unsettling and clever, as he knew how to avoid suspicion. In January 2001, the case went to trial at Liverpool Crown Court. However, before the trial began, Mitchell attempted to change his confession. He claimed he hadn't killed Lindsay, but had only dismembered and discarded her body. His story was so far-fetched that even his own legal team urged him to drop it. Ultimately, Mitchell pleaded guilty to all charges. The court found him guilty not only of murder, but also of obstructing justice and misleading law enforcement. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 17 years. Meanwhile, Elliot received a 7-year sentence, which many members of Lindsay's family felt was too lenient. The outcome brought some relief, but it did not bring peace. Sadly, just 3 months after the sentencing, the family faced another heartbreaking tragedy. Lindsay's brother, Peter Wilson Jr., was found dead in the attic of their childhood home. He had taken his own life, leaving no note, but those who knew him understood the reason. Peter had never forgiven himself for introducing Lindsay to Mitchell. In the months following her death, he fell into a deep depression, isolating himself and overwhelmed by guilt. He often expressed that his life felt meaningless without his sister. Tragically, it was his father, who had already been burdened by Lindsay's loss, who discovered Peter's body. At that time, Peter's fiancée was pregnant, meaning another child would grow up without knowing their father, yet another victim of the devastation caused by Mitchell's actions. In 2017, Mitchell became eligible for parole. Lindsay's daughter, Robin, who was only 22 at the time, started a campaign to stop his release. She created a petition on Facebook that gathered thousands of signatures and became a powerful call for justice. The public's anger contributed to the rejection of Mitchell's parole requests. By 2022, he had been denied parole 3 times. His ongoing manipulative behavior in prison, such as aggressive outbursts and involvement in illegal substances smuggling, reinforced the arguments against his release. Lindsay's children, Robin and Jack, were brought up by Wilson family in a loving and stable environment, which was the kind of upbringing their mother always wished for them. Their story today serves as a powerful reminder that there are often people behind closed doors who are quietly asking for help. Lindsay Kwai's 1998 murder by Mitchell Kwai tore through her family and Southport's quiet streets. Her cheerful spirit, the light to her children, Robin and Jack, was lost in a barbaric act. The pain deepened when her brother, Peter Wilson Jr., took his own life. Despite this, the Wilson family found strength. Robin's courageous fight kept Mitchell in prison, honoring her mother's love. Southport's community rallied, sharing flyers and holding vigils to keep Lindsay's name alive and warn against domestic abuse. Meanwhile, her unrecovered remains leave an ache, but Robin and Jack thrive in the caring home Lindsay always wanted. Her story begs us to notice those trapped in silence, to offer help, and to hold loved ones close before it's too late. On August 16, 2023, a young woman was admitted to the Mayo Clinic, one of the top medical centers in the world, in critical condition. Her internal organs were failing quickly. She was severely dehydrated, and her body temperature was unstable. Despite the emergency treatments, Doctors were having a hard time stabilizing her because they could not identify the cause of her sudden decline. Betty Bowman, a successful pharmacist known for her commitment to health and wellness, was now fighting for her life. Her colleagues were stunned. Just the day before, she had been vibrant and energetic. Now medical professionals were urgently trying to save her. One by one, possible diagnoses were eliminated. Lab tests did not yield clear results, and her condition kept deteriorating. What could have led to such a swift decline in the health of a young, otherwise healthy woman? As doctors sought answers, they started to understand that the cause was not a typical illness. Betty was born in 1991 in Kansas. She grew up in a hard-working family that valued honesty, perseverance, and care for one another. From a young age, she showed determination and a strong work ethic in all her endeavors. She performed well in school, particularly excelling in science, developed a deep passion for biology and chemistry. After high school, she enrolled in a pharmacy program at university, where she quickly became one of the top students. Unlike many of her classmates who focused on memorizing theories, Betty was truly interested in medical processes, chemical compounds, and how medications affect the human body. After graduation, she started her career working in a pharmacy before moving to a medical facility. There, she earned the respect of her co-workers and built a reputation as a dedicated, knowledgeable professional. Connor Bowman was born in 1993 in Kansas, but his upbringing was quite different from Betty's. He was self-centered and strategic, often manipulating others to achieve his goals. Unlike Betty, he did not value hard work and integrity. Instead, he aimed to gain the most benefit with the least effort. Academically, Connor was not exceptional in school, but his charisma and quick thinking helped him handle challenging situations smoothly. He had a talent for winning over important people and presenting himself positively, choosing a career in pharmaceuticals. He attended the same university as Betty. However, his interest in medicine was not aligned with that of his peers. While they wanted to help others, Connor approached pharmacology with a focus on influence and control over the human body. Later, he pursued further education in a medical program to open up more career opportunities, elevate his professional standing. Betty and Connor met while studying at university. Despite their differing personalities, they formed a relationship. Betty admired Connor for his intelligence and ambition, while Connor appreciated the advantages of being with her. They got married in May 2021. A few months later, Betty received a job offer from the prestigious Mayo Clinic, prompting them to move to Minnesota. For Betty, this was a significant career advancement, but for Connor, it meant living in the shadow of his successful wife. At that time, he was still in school, and all financial responsibilities fell on Betty. She paid for their living expenses, his education, and daily costs. Connor did not work and depended entirely on his wife's support. Eventually, growing comfortable with this dynamic, as time went on, Betty's focus shifted more towards her career. She made new friends and thrived professionally, while Connor began to feel insecure and sidelined. Although they seemed like a successful couple on the surface, tension was brewing beneath. Over time, Betty started to suspect that Connor had developed deeper feelings for someone else. When she discovered the truth, her suspicions were confirmed. It wasn't just a casual affair, but genuine affection. This revelation became the breaking point for Betty, leading her to decide on a divorce. To her, it made sense, but for Connor, it meant losing his comfortable lifestyle and financial stability. He realized that post-divorce, he would be starting from scratch with debts and no safety net. Divorce wasn't in his plans. He considered another option that promised both freedom and financial gain. On August 10, 2023, Betty Bowman was at her home in Rochester, Minnesota. She had invited a close friend over for the evening to relax, catch up, and take a break from work. It had been some time since they last met. Both were excited to spend time together. Connor was also home that evening, but he typically did not join these gatherings. He usually kept to himself, showed little interest in Betty's conversations with her friends, and preferred to focus on his own activities. That day, Connor was behaving unusually. Out of the blue, he offered to make smoothies, which surprised Betty. He had never shown interest in cooking or care for her meals before. Household chores always fell to her. This unexpected gesture felt out of character for him. Connor went into the kitchen, collected the ingredients, and began making the drinks. Betty's friend noticed his excitement and was slightly surprised, but didn't give it much thought. Betty also didn't question it, although suggested something was off about his behavior. A few minutes later, he came back with 2 glasses. When Betty took a sip, she quickly realized something was wrong. The drink had a bitter, slightly salty aftertaste that felt unusual. She frowned, perplexed by the strange flavor. Her friend, intrigued by the reaction, decided to give it a try too. The taste was indeed horrible, and the smoothie was ruined. However, no one considered what might have caused the bad flavor. They just set the glasses aside and moved on. Connor didn't offer any explanation. He didn't suggest making another batch, didn't explain the strange taste, and showed no interest in the fact that the drink was undrinkable. Betty quickly brushed off the incident, thinking he simply made a bad smoothie. However, it wasn't an accident, it was actually the first attempt, which failed because she hadn't finished the drink. Connor recognized his error and realized that next time he needed to ensure it turned out better. On August 14, 2023, everything appeared normal at the Bowman home. Betty returned late from a long day at work, feeling exhausted after spending hours in the lab, discussing new pharmaceutical research with her colleagues. She just wanted to relax, have a quick dinner, and get some rest. Connor recognized this was a crucial moment for him. His first attempt a few days earlier had failed because the taste was too evident. He had learned from his mistakes and was determined to be more careful this time. Throughout the day, he researched how the added substance would affect the body and calculated the precise amount needed to induce a severe reaction without immediate effects. He waited for the perfect moment when Betty was tired and less likely to notice anything unusual. When she entered the kitchen, he casually offered her a smoothie. He acted relaxed to avoid arousing her suspicion. Betty accepted the glass, took a few sips, and finished the smoothie calmly. This time, the taste seemed perfectly normal. Connor had thoughtfully adjusted the ingredients to hide any unusual flavors. That evening, Betty started to feel unwell. She felt a bit tired and had a mild headache. Thinking it wasn't serious, she didn't think much of it. However, by the morning of August 15th, her condition had deteriorated. She woke up with a severe headache, nausea, and extreme exhaustion. Shortly after, she began to have serious stomach problems. Her body was losing fluids quickly, and even a small sip of water made her feel sick again. By midday, Betty's condition had worsened. She struggled to get out of bed, feeling as if her body was heavy. Her temperature was gow, and her muscles hurt. By evening, her weakness intensified to the point where walking to the bathroom became difficult. She was very dehydrated, and she kept feeling sick. Every time she tried to eat, she felt even worse. On August 16th, she recognized that she could no longer take care of herself. She felt so weak that even a simple phone call was tiring. She contacted the Mayo Clinic to explain her symptoms. Later that day, Betty Bowman was admitted to the hospital in critical condition. She was dangerously dehydrated. Her blood pressure was unstable, and she had a high temperature. Doctors quickly initiated a thorough evaluation, but they could not determine the cause. Initial tests indicated severe complications affecting her internal organs. The most alarming finding was in her intestines, where scans showed areas of dead tissue. This meant that parts of her digestive tract were not getting enough oxygen and had started to die. Emergency surgery was performed to remove the damaged part of her body, but doctors were uncertain if the issue had spread further. After the surgery, she was placed in intensive care and connected to life support machines. Unfortunately, her condition worsened. Within hours, her kidneys began to fail, and she needed dialysis. The situation escalated when, on August 18th, her liver also showed signs of trouble. Tests revealed a significant increase in liver enzymes, indicating toxic damage. The medical team was perplexed by Betty's condition. She was a young, healthy woman without any history of chronic illness. Why was her health deteriorating so rapidly? During this time, Connor Bowman showed unusual determination. He often told doctors that his wife had a rare genetic condition called hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis, HLH. This was odd because HLH usually appears in early childhood, and Betty had never shown any symptoms of it. The doctors looked into her medical history and found no signs of the condition. Even more alarming, Connor was informing friends and family that Betty was dying from this disease, even though the medical team had not diagnosed her with it. On August 19th, Betty's health took a severe turn for the worse as she experienced multiple organ failure. Her heart, kidneys, and liver stopped functioning properly, and fluid built up in her lungs, making it hard for her to breathe. Despite the doctor's best efforts, the situation looked dire. On August 20th, 2023, at 2:50 p.m., Betty Bowman, 32, was declared dead. The medical team could not determine the exact cause of her death. However, her husband's lack of questions and his behavior raised some concerns. He did not seem to seek answers, inquire about possible causes, or request further examination. Instead, he appeared to act as if he already anticipated the outcome. After Betty's death, doctors recommended an autopsy because Betty's unexpected decline was puzzling, and standard protocols call for a post-mortem examination. However, Connor firmly opposed this. He asserted that Betty had always expressed a desire not to have her body used for medical research. This declaration surprised the staff at the Mayo Clinic, as it is common for families to seek answers when someone who seemed healthy dies suddenly. Most families typically request additional tests and clarifications. In contrast, Connor was resolute in insisting that no autopsy be conducted and that there should be no further investigation. Law enforcement officers involved in the case noted that his behavior was suspicious. He not only refused an autopsy, but also rushed to make funeral arrangements. Just hours after Betty's death, he submitted the cremation paperwork and wanted it done quickly. However, doctors stepped in because they were not convinced her death was from natural causes. They decided to pause the cremation to conduct further investigations. The next day, Connor began writing an obituary, which revealed another strange aspect of the case. He did not mention Betty's mother and sister, the two people closest to her. Instead, he only referenced himself and their dog. This made it seem like he was intentionally downplaying Betty's family ties, almost trying to erase parts of her life. Around this time, Connor invited an acquaintance over for drinks. The acquaintance later noted that they had expected to find a grieving husband in distress. However, when they arrived at the house, they saw Connor looking relaxed and even cheerful. During their conversation, he showed no signs of sadness, didn't mention what had happened, and seemed unfazed for someone who had just lost his wife days earlier. Just days after the funeral, Connor started openly talking about the $500,000 life insurance payout he received after his wife's death. It seemed like he was satisfied with how things had turned out. Many people respected Betty both professionally and personally. Those close to her expected her husband to be deeply affected by her loss. However, he appeared relaxed. Some who overheard his discussions noted that he talked about the insurance money as if it had resolved his financial issues instead of representing the loss of his wife. Investigators became particularly interested in Connor's financial situation after discovering that he had been facing considerable debt while in school. He had accumulated substantial student loans that continued to increase. Unlike Betty, who had a stable and well-paying job, Connor was financially dependent. As he was still completing his medical training, his residence salary was insufficient to meet their expenses. As investigators examined his behavior following Betty's death, more troubling details came to light. Even before he received the insurance payout, he did not try to find other sources of income and showed no concern for his financial future. This raised questions. If Betty's death had truly been unexpected, shouldn't he have been eager to find answers? Wouldn't he have asked the doctors questions, sought explanations, or requested additional tests? Instead, he appeared to act as if he already knew what had happened, suggesting that any further inquiry would only complicate things for him. Detectives ultimately determined that Connor's financial difficulties could have been a significant motive for the crime. He had a strong incentive to benefit from his wife's death, as he stood to gain much more financially than he would have from a divorce. Friends and family of Betty were shocked that someone so close to her could plan such a cruel act for financial gain. Connor's behavior, his emotional detachment, and his financial problems suggested that Betty's death may not have been an accident. Investigators collected blood samples from Betty taken during her hospital stay. The tests revealed a startling finding. Her blood contained a dangerously high level of colchicine, a substance used in medical treatments that can be fatal in large amounts. Colchicine is not commonly linked to intentional poisoning, as it is hard to obtain without professional access. It is mainly used to treat gout, but its toxic effects can be very harmful if misused. The symptoms of an overdose aligned perfectly with Betty's condition, starting with nausea, stomach problems, and weakness, and progressing to organ failure and intestinal necrosis. After obtaining this information, investigators started to explore who might have access to the substance. Their investigation soon pointed to Connor Bowman. With a medical background, he possessed the knowledge to use colchicine effectively. Even more alarmingly, he had previously worked at a poison control center, studying how toxic compounds affect the human body. This finding was the first significant clue suggesting he could be linked to the incident. Detectives began interviewing Betty's friends and family. Her close friend, who was at Betty's house on August 10th, recounted a peculiar incident involving a smoothie. The friend noted that the drink tasted bitter and slightly salty. Initially, they both thought the smoothie had simply spoiled. She also remembered joking at the time that Connor might have tampered with the drink. They laughed off the remark then, but now it felt much more serious. This detail caught the investigators' attention, as it suggested that someone might have attempted to poison Betty even before she was hospitalized. If the first attempt had a low dose, it seemed reasonable to believe that Connor might have tried again, using a stronger concentration of the substance. Betty's family, including her mother and sister, revealed that in the weeks before her death, she had been seriously thinking about getting a divorce. They recalled her expressing unhappiness in her marriage and her intention to separate. All the evidence suggests that Betty's death might not have been a tragic accident, but instead a carefully planned crime. After confirming the presence of colchicine in Betty's system, investigators sought additional evidence. They secured permission to search Connor's workspace at the Mayo Clinic, where he was completing his medical residency. A review of his work computer uncovered troubling information. His browser history included searches like lethal dose of colchicine, how to hide traces of poison, can police track search history, and how to erase purchase records on Amazon. These searches were significant to the investigation, suggesting that Connor had researched fatal dosages beforehand and was actively looking for ways to conceal his actions. Investigators looking into Connor Bowman's online accounts found that he had bought substances not connected to his medical practice. These substances included colchicine and sodium nitrate, raising further alarm. Although sodium nitrate is often used in the chemical and food sectors, it can be toxic in higher doses. The investigators determined that Connor was experimenting with various compounds, trying to find a subtle method to harm his wife without attracting attention. The investigation also revealed that Connor was claiming to be a widower on the dating app Bumble even before his wife's death. A woman who met him on September 5th reported to investigators that she asked him if it was appropriate to flirt with someone else after his wife's passing. Connor said it was a good question and that he was open to dating again. He expressed that he knew what he wanted in life and believed that Betty would have wanted him to move on and be happy. The documents state that he told her his wife had died from listeria poisoning earlier in the summer. Additionally, another woman who met Bowman on August 29th, just 9 days after Betty's death, found it odd when he mentioned a significant life insurance payout he received, which he used to pay off his student loans. On October 20th, 2023, authorities issued an arrest warrant for Connor Bowman. By then, there was substantial evidence against him, including lab reports, his search history on his work computer, and his suspicious behavior after Betty's death. He was arrested in the early morning at his home in Rochester, Minnesota. Officers arrived with the warrant, and Bowman was taken into custody without putting up a fight. He remained calm and showed no aggression, but he also did not try to defend himself, which caught the attention of investigators. The court set Bowman's bail at $2 million, but he could not afford to pay it. After his arrest, his financial situation changed dramatically. His accounts were frozen, and his assets were investigated without access to his funds. He stayed in custody while waiting for his trial. Meanwhile, investigators worked to collect more evidence to fully understand the crime. They looked into his communications, financial records, and relationships with colleagues and acquaintances to identify potential motives, find any additional incriminating information. The legal process was just starting, but it was already evident that Connor Bowman would face justice. After his arrest, Betty's family and friends called for the toughest punishment available. They were certain that her death was the result of a premeditated crime. They sought a life sentence, convinced that someone who could commit such a deliberate act should never be released. The prosecution was diligent in building a strong case, making sure the evidence was compelling and undeniable. Although the trial had not begun yet, the evidence clearly indicated Connor's guilt. Betty's family endured a painful wait for justice. They found it hard to accept that someone she had trusted, who had been in her life for many years, had betrayed her in such a devastating manner. Her mother and sister remembered conversations where Betty had shared her unhappiness and her desire to move on, never expecting that things would turn out so tragically. Betty's friends played an important role in the case. Several of them served as witnesses, sharing valuable testimony and information that strengthened the investigation. They supported her family in their quest for justice, ensuring that the responsible individual would be held accountable. Connor Bowman was charged with second-degree murder in the summer of 2023 in the death of Betty Bowman, but a grand jury indicted him on first-degree murder in January 2024. Connor Bowman's trial has not happened yet. The law enforcement is still collecting evidence and getting ready for the court case. However, a trial date has not been established. Larissa Rodriguez grew up in a humble but close-knit family. Her parents were modest and reserved. They raised her with strong values of integrity, a strong work ethic, and family loyalty. From an early age, Larissa showed remarkable discipline. She trained in gymnastics, later graduated with a degree in sports science, and worked as a trainer and instructor at a fitness club. She led a healthy lifestyle, avoided harmful habits, meticulously cared for her well-being. She had only one serious relationship with Luis Antonio Garnica, who became her first partner and later her husband. To the family, he seemed quiet and polite. Larissa believed in the ideal of a strong family, and despite strains in their relationship, she remained committed to preserving the marriage. Luis came from a well-off background. His father had served as mayor of Pontal, and Luis himself was trained in medicine. But behind that veneer of success, he was self-centered and calculating. According to Larissa's relatives, at the beginning of their relationship, he had no steady income and depended on Larissa's mother, who sent him home, cooked meals over time. Despite having a diploma, his finances never improved, and he struggled to support two parallel lives, his official marriage and a secret relationship. His standing among Larissa's friends and family deteriorated. He grew increasingly withdrawn, distant, and indifferent. Even during Larissa's mother's final days, he visited only when forced. In the last months of the marriage, Luis was emotionally detached, cold, and often degraded his wife about her appearance, avoiding any real communication. Despite her efforts to reconcile, he continued to move further away, ignoring the obvious signs of their relationship's crisis. Elizabeth Arabaza, Luis's mother, played a pivotal role in this story. At 68, she appeared quiet and unassuming. But in reality, she was a manipulator with a troubling history. Her former husband and her daughter claimed she had a gambling problem and was deeply in debt. There were suspicions surrounding her involvement in the mysterious death of a relative connected through financial dealings. She often asked acquaintances for money and was suspected of selling others' jewelry. Her behavior within the Garnacher family drew mixed opinions. With Larissa, she maintained the image of a caring mother-in-law, yet she regularly shared confidential information with her son and withheld crucial details from her daughter-in-law. Over time, it became clear she had played a decisive role in tearing the family apart and setting the stage for the tragic events that followed. These three figures, Larissa, Louise, and Elisabetta, became the central players in a chain of events whose outcomes were irreversible. In the spring of 2025, tensions between Larissa and Louise escalated dramatically. Their conflicts had become a regular occurrence, and any remaining trust was shattered. Louise's behavior grew increasingly distant. He often claimed to be working late or on call, but in reality, he was frequently meeting with another woman named Letitia. Larissa didn't know the woman's name at first, but she began to suspect he was seeing someone else, especially after noticing odd changes in his routine and his frequent irritation for no clear reason. Her suspicions were confirmed after she discreetly followed him one evening in mid-March. Larissa spotted Louise heading toward Letitia's house on a night he claimed to be working an overnight shift. Not long after that, she found personal items in his car, along with a medical-grade anesthetic, which clearly indicated a secretive relationship. She confided in Elisabetta, her mother-in-law, hoping for understanding. Instead, Elisabetta quickly told Louise about the confrontation and criticized Larissa for spying on him. Rather than receiving comfort, Larissa was told that being unfaithful is just something men do. Larissa didn't act on impulse. Despite her personal disappointment, she still tried to preserve her family. According to her father, she wanted to have a calm conversation with Louise and find a peaceful resolution. Over the next few days, she spoke privately with close friends about the possibility of divorce, but asked them not to get involved. Meanwhile, a friend offered her temporary use of an unoccupied apartment to help her take a step back and think things through. On March 15, 2025, Larissa tells Louise of her decision to end the marriage. She also confirmed her intentions to a trusted friend. Her goal was to reduce tension and prepare for a respectful separation. The following day, March 16th, Elisabetta Arabata began researching highly toxic substances online. That same day, she offered Larissa homemade soup. Larissa, unaware of any danger, accepted the meal. Within hours, she began experiencing severe gastrointestinal symptoms, including cramps and nausea. Despite feeling unwell, Larissa assumed the discomfort was caused by stress or possibly spoiled food. On March 18th, Larissa once again opened up to a close friend, expressing how drained she felt physically and emotionally. She said her energy was slipping away and shared her concern that Louise continued to avoid any meaningful conversation. At the same time, Elisabetta, his mother, became unusually attentive, bringing food, initiating frequent visits, and insisting on helping Larissa, despite previously criticizing her for wanting to leave the marriage. By March 19th, Larissa confided in a relative about her worsening condition. She described sudden chills, weakness, abdominal pain, and an overwhelming sense of dread. She noted that she had never experienced anything like it before, and that the symptoms had persisted for several days. That message would become one of the last times she discussed her health. On March 20th, Larissa told her father she no longer saw a future in the marriage. Though she was still hoping to avoid a public fallout, she wanted the divorce to be amicable, if possible. That day, Elisabetta seemed calm but continued bringing over food. Larissa, although feeling unwell, didn't yet suspect a link between the meals and her condition. She assumed her health issues stemmed from emotional stress. Then came March 21st. Elisabetta arrived again with homemade soup. Larissa's condition took a drastic turn for the worse. By late that evening, she stopped responding to calls and messages. A few hours later, the devastating news came. She had passed away. On the morning of March 22nd, 2025, Louise reported that he had found his wife unconscious in their apartment. He claimed he'd just returned from a night shift, walked in, and found Larissa lying on the floor. According to his account, he immediately began CPR and called emergency services. However, discrepancies between his story and the actual evidence began to surface within hours of the investigation. One critical detail was a message Louise sent to Leticia. At 10:25 m.m., he texted Leticia to tell her that Larissa had passed away. Just 9 minutes later, at 10:34 m., paramedics arrived. Yet when they entered, Louise was still performing resuscitation efforts, claiming Larissa was showing signs of life. The medical team quickly determined otherwise. She was already in a state of rigor mortis, making revival impossible. Emergency personnel documented that her body was cold, with no pulse or breathing, and her skin showed clear signs consistent with an extended time of death. When police arrived at the scene, one of the first things they noted was Louise's insistence on a rapid cremation. He didn't notify Larissa's family right away about her passing and took it upon himself to begin arranging the necessary paperwork for cremation. This immediately raised red flags for investigators, especially since Larissa's cultural background strictly followed burial traditions, with cremation never being considered. At the scene, officers noticed that the environment had been tampered with. Bed sheets had been stripped, rolled up. Towels with what appeared to be reddish stains were found nearby, and the laundry basket contained items possibly used for cleanup. The paramedic examining Larissa's body took note of undigested food in her stomach. This detail would later become a critical piece of evidence, prompting a full toxicology analysis. The initial assumption of a sudden cardiac event began to shift toward concerns about a possible poisoning. Louise's behavior on the day Larissa died seemed artificial, as if he were acting to make her death look like a sudden accident. The timeline, the messages he sent, and his behavior before and after emergency services arrived painted a picture that seemed increasingly rehearsed. At first glance, Louise seemed like a distraught husband caught in a crisis, but as investigators dug deeper, examining documents, message logs, and expert findings, the surface narrative started to unravel. Attention shifted from simply understanding what happened to examining who may have played a role in the moments immediately after Larissa's life ended. Following the official announcement of Larissa's death, Louise came under increasing scrutiny. Within just 24 hours of the incident, his actions raised serious concerns. The day after Larissa's passing, attempted financial transactions were discovered using her bank accounts. Louise used her debit card to purchase items at a pharmacy and attempted to withdraw cash from an ATM. Several of these transactions were flagged and declined due to suspicious activity. One attempt to access her savings account failed because of automatic security blocks. Later, bank officials confirmed that the attempted transactions originated from devices registered to Louise. At a local bank branch in Pontal, a teller reported an unusual request. Viviani, Louise's sister, attempted to obtain account information for Larissa. Despite having no legal authority to access those records, Larissa's account was registered in a different region, and Viviani's attempt to retrieve private financial data without a formal power of attorney was officially logged as an unauthorized access attempt. This incident immediately drew the attention of investigators. Meanwhile, Larissa's family, especially her brother and father, pushed for a thorough investigation into the circumstances surrounding her death. Troubled by rumors and inconsistencies, Larissa's brother sought legal counsel from attorney. Consultations with legal representatives began on March 24th, 2 days after her death. Despite online speculation suggesting Larissa may have taken her own life, her loved ones firmly rejected that possibility. According to those close to her, Larissa had no history of mental health struggles, maintained an active lifestyle, was in therapy, and had clear plans for her future, including filing for divorce. The attorney hired by Larissa's family demanded that no cremation take place until a full toxicological analysis was completed. This move proved critical to the case. The pathologist ordered a comprehensive examination, including toxicology screenings. While the initial exam did not pinpoint an immediate cause of death, the lab tests became central to developing the leading theory. At the same time, investigators focused on digital evidence, combing through text messages, GPS data, and call logs. Recovered chats between Louise, Viviani, and others provided deeper insight. One particularly telling exchange showed Viviani advising Louise to be cautious with their phones and not to confuse devices. In another message, she reminded him to mention a supposed history of heart conditions in Larissa's family when speaking to authorities. These texts were interpreted as an attempt to shape a false narrative and create a medically plausible explanation for what had occurred. While the investigation remained active, the family's lawyer successfully petitioned to freeze all of Larissa's financial accounts and restrict access to her assets. Authorities across relevant agencies were notified. These legal safeguards were essential in preventing further unauthorized actions by Louise and those allegedly working with him. At this point, investigators completely ruled out end her own life. Every move Louise and Viviani made following Larissa's passing appeared calculated, aimed at reducing exposure and covering their tracks. These patterns were sufficient to launch the formal phase of criminal proceedings. Roughly 1 month before Larissa passed away, another family member died under mysterious circumstances, Natalia, daughter of Elisabetti. At the time, the incident received no public attention. Natalia lived in Pontal with a long-term partner in a domestic relationship. Shortly before her death, she had a major falling out with her mother. Elisabetti strongly opposed Natalia's plans to start a family and become a parent. Their arguments centered around inheritance issues and shares in the family business. Following the disagreement, Natalia's partner left the house, leaving her alone with Elisabetti, something relatives later described as highly unusual. In the days that followed, Natalia complained of feeling increasingly unwell. However, Elisabetti never sought medical help or contacted emergency services. Instead, she reached out to Louise and Viviani, who were in another city at the time. The drive from Ribeirão Preto to Pontal takes approximately 40 minutes. During this time, Natalia remained without assistance. By the time Louise and Viviani arrived, Natalia's condition had deteriorated significantly. She was later taken to a hospital where she died. Eyewitnesses claimed that despite his medical training, Louise didn't advocate for emergency care and seemed more focused on when the death certificate would be issued. This detail was documented and became the subject of further investigation. Initially, Natalia's death was classified as natural, but as Larissa's case unfolded, new findings began to cast serious doubt on that conclusion. One red flag was the unexplained death of Natalia's dog. 2 weeks before the tragedy, relatives reported that the dog had no known health issues. Authorities approved the exhumation of the pet for toxicology testing based on the theory that poison might have been tested on the animal. Natalia's father, Antonio, revealed during questioning that Elisabetti was facing serious financial problems. He stated Elisabetti had debts exceeding 300,000 reais, some of which were linked to gambling. Natalia held a 16% share in the family business, which, because she had no dependent children, passed directly to her mother upon her death. Antonio also testified that not long before she passed, Natalia had mentioned receiving threats from her mother regarding her personal life. Elisabetti's alleged efforts to secure full control over those assets led to major tensions with her ex-husband. Further disturbing details emerged about Elisabetti's past. Years earlier, a friend recalled a strange episode. After having tea with Elisabetti, she experienced sharp abdominal pain, followed by unconsciousness. Emergency care saved her, and doctors later suspected a toxic substance had been involved. However, that case was never formally investigated. As Larissa's story gained public attention, more people connected to the Garnica family began stepping forward, sharing concerns about Elizabetti's behavior. After reviewing the series of suspicious patterns, investigators reached a preliminary conclusion. Natalia may have been the first confirmed victim, and her dog, potentially part of a test run for what followed. The combination of poisoning, delayed medical response, concealed symptoms, and a motive rooted in inheritance formed a disturbing picture. From this point forward, the case took on a much broader scope. A deeper analysis of these incidents revealed a consistent pattern in Elizabetti's financial behavior. She repeatedly sought new sources of income, pressured those close to her, and manipulated legal access to property and assets. After Natalia and Larissa passed, these tactics intensified in the context of mounting debts and financial instability. Her motives became a central focus of the investigation. Amid the dual investigations into the deaths of Larissa and Natalia, law enforcement began uncovering information that hinted at additional potentially criminal episodes linked to Elisabetta Arrabate. The case involved a woman who had been friendly with Elisabetta. Years after an odd incident, she finally spoke out. Following a tea visit at Elisabetta's home, she suddenly felt dizzy, nauseous, and disoriented. Elisabetta offered her a headache remedy, a blue capsule. She took the pill, but was later hospitalized that night with suspected poisoning. Doctors documented toxic exposure to an unknown substance, but the woman never filed a report at the time. She later admitted she was afraid of becoming entangled in legal battles. Eventually, she reached out to Larissa's family attorney after media reports surfaced about possible poisonings. Yet another concerning event came to light. Elisabetta had attempted to obtain power of attorney from a woman expecting to receive court-ordered compensation. The woman, alarmed by Elisabetta's persistence, later told investigators she feared she might have been a future target. Her statement was formally included in the case files. According to law enforcement, a clear pattern was beginning to emerge in Elisabetta's actions. She would first establish close relationships with financially stable women, earn their trust, and shortly afterward, they would suffer sudden and unexplained health issues. Given these accounts, investigators began pursuing a new theory. They might be dealing with a series of connected incidents rather than isolated ones. Law enforcement officials issued a public appeal, urging anyone who had experienced suspicious behavior from Elisabetta Arrabate to contact authorities. Once the toxicology reports came in, the investigation entered a decisive phase. Forensic specialists confirmed the presence of a compound derived from chumbinho, a banned toxic substance in Larissa's system. This finding was pivotal. Until then, Louise and Elisabetta had claimed that Larissa passed away from natural causes, but the chemical evidence completely debunked their story. Another critical piece of the puzzle came from surveillance footage at the residential complex. Security cameras showed that, on the morning of March 22nd, Louise arrived at the apartment later than he had claimed, and Viviani arrived shortly before emergency services were called. These details directly contradicted their official statements. Taken together, the presence of a toxic compound, suspicious online searches, misleading explanations, tampered evidence, and timeline inconsistencies formed a clear chain of evidence. Investigators concluded that Larissa's death was not a random event, but a carefully coordinated act carried out by multiple individuals. The evidence didn't just suggest wrongdoing, it presented a legally viable case of premeditated criminal activity. By mid-April 2025, the investigation reached the stage of formal charges. Based on forensic data, digital correspondence, and verified discrepancies in witness accounts, police filed charges against three primary individuals: Elisabetta Arrabate, Luis Garnica, and his sister, Viviani Garnica. The main charge involved the intentional death of Larissa Rodriguez through poisoning. Investigators determined that Elisabetta had prepared Larissa's meals in the final days of her life, actively researched toxic substances, created a plan to conceal the act, and coordinated the actions of her family members. Luis was charged as an accomplice. He was aware of his mother's intentions, failed to intervene, concealed signs of poisoning, and helped destroy evidence afterward. He was also the one who pushed for rapid cremation, a move that could have eliminated the chance of detecting any toxic substances. Viviani was also named as an accomplice. Her role included coordination with her brother, erasing digital traces, attempting to access the victim's bank accounts, and helping conceal key details surrounding the incident. Recovered messages from her phone confirmed that she knew about Larissa's death in advance and was involved in planning how to speak with law enforcement and medical professionals. Simultaneously, a separate investigation was launched into the circumstances surrounding Natalia's passing. Another contributing factor was the earlier death of Natalia's dog, which had also raised alarms. While formal charges in Natalia's case had not yet been filed, the evidence was placed in a separate investigative file. The charges against all three individuals were formally submitted to the district attorney's office. Each was summoned for questioning. Following the interrogation, both Elisabetta and Louise were taken into custody. Viviani was placed under travel restrictions, required to remain within the region, and ordered to surrender her passport. Meanwhile, the court approved a request to seize Garnica family assets and freeze all accounts tied to the suspects. The case sparked significant public interest. Journalists, advocacy groups, and legal experts began a national conversation about the shortcomings in addressing domestic aggression, legal loopholes in women's protection, and missed warning signs. Many pointed out that the tragedy might have been avoided had social services intervened earlier. At this point, the charges have been formally established, and the investigation has completed the collection of core evidence. Next, the trial will proceed, with the expectation of revealing the whole truth to the public. Diaz met Jared James Dekas while working at Cheppy's Meat Market, a local grocery store in Taqueria, Texas. At the time, Angie was a 21-year-old immigrant from Nicaragua who had come to the U.S. seeking a better life for herself and her family. Jared, also 21, had recently started working at the same store. The two quickly grew close. Angie is impressed with Jared's friendly personality and hard-working spirit, which harmonizes well with her responsibility and maturity, as she is the eldest of 4 siblings. During their work breaks, they would talk and laugh about their dreams and future plans. To her, Jared is a reliable support and brings her comfort, having left Nicaragua and her family behind, particularly her mother, who was battling cancer. Angie longed for someone to share her struggles and aspirations with. Her devotion to her family and determination to provide for them drove her to work multiple jobs, and Jared's companionship filled her with hope. Their friendship at work soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. Outside of work, they grew closer by sharing meals and discussing their goals. To those around them, Angie and Jared seemed like a happy and loving young couple, trying to build a future together in America. She had recently achieved a significant personal goal, becoming a fitness coach, a testament to her dedication and perseverance. Angie's co-workers at Cheppy's Meat Market often remarked on her joy when she was with Jared. Her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noted how she would brighten up when talking about him and described her as being incredibly happy in her relationship. However, as their relationship became more serious, small changes in Angie's behavior began to indicate that not everything was going smoothly. While these shifts were initially dismissed as normal life stresses, they began to raise concerns among her loved ones. Jared proposed to Angie after months of dating, and she was thrilled to accept. Marriage symbolized not just love, but also stability and partnership, which Angie hoped would help her continue supporting her family in Nicaragua. Their engagement was full of excitement as they planned for their future. On October 22, 2022, they tied the knot in a wedding ceremony officiated by Waller County Judge Trey Duhon, who later described them as a kind and loving young couple. Friends and family came together to celebrate what seemed to be the start of a happy, secure future for the pair. After their wedding, Angie and Jared decided to move into a small cabin on Jared's parents' property on Oak Hollow Boulevard in Waller County, Texas. This provided affordable housing as they worked on building their financial foundation as a couple. For Angie, who regularly sent money back to Nicaragua, the arrangement was practical. She balanced her job at Chepi's meat market with her fitness coaching career, earning consistent praise from her manager, Ruth Armendariz, for her dedication and positive attitude. Co-workers described her as hardworking, energetic, and highly ambitious. However, cracks began to show in their seemingly happy relationship. While Angie kept up her cheerful persona, her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noticed subtle changes. Veronica recalled that some days Angie seemed different, explaining that she appeared tired, though it wasn't clear whether it was because of work or her relationship. Jared's arrest for driving under the influence, just a month into their marriage, was the first major warning sign. The incident occurred at a Whataburger restaurant, where employees called the police after Jared became aggressive and tried to force his way inside. Responding officers described him as belligerent and locked him out of the building. During a search of his car, police found a partially full bottle of Bud Light. Jared admitted to taking pills but couldn't specify the medication. Beyond the legal consequences, this event revealed aspects of Jared's behavior Angie likely had not fully understood before their marriage. The situation worsened during Jared's booking process, where his aggressive behavior escalated. Court records showed Jared threatened both the arresting officers and jail staff. His actions became so disruptive that he punched windows and had to be restrained in a chair for safety. This incident highlighted a troubling pattern of aggression that would later become even more significant. As time passed, friends and family noticed more worrying signs in Angie and Jared's marriage. While Angie had seemed very happy at first, her demeanor changed after the wedding. At social gatherings, friends saw a difference in her, though she never openly complained or sought help. One notable incident occurred at a Christmas party in December 2022, just weeks before Angie's death. Friends said that she and Jared left the party abruptly, and Jared looked very upset. Although this worried everyone, no one realized the true severity of the problem. During this period, law enforcement had been called to their home multiple times for domestic disturbances. While Waller County Sheriff Troy Guidry noted that these calls didn't involve extreme violence, they reflected ongoing conflict within the marriage. An unnamed friend of Angie later revealed that Jared had displayed possessive behavior during their marriage. He was described as jealous, and one particular social media post stood out, where Jared had written that she was his. The friend found it unsettling, commenting that no one had questioned their relationship, making the post seem unnecessary. Such possessiveness is often a warning sign of potential domestic violence. Despite the warning signs, Angie seemed determined to stay in her marriage. Her friends later speculated that she might have been too embarrassed to admit her relationship was struggling. This hesitation to seek help or openly talk about relationship issues is sadly common among domestic violence victims, who often feel ashamed or believe they can manage the situation on their own. What made Angie's story especially tragic was her unwavering devotion to her family in Nicaragua. Despite facing difficulties in her marriage, she worked 2 jobs to help fund her mother's cancer treatment, showcasing her selflessness and dedication. Her co-workers at Chepi's Meat Market and Taqueria described her as someone who always put others first and aimed to improve not just her own life, but her entire family's well-being. By January 2023, tensions in Angie and Jared's marriage were clearly escalating. While the specifics of their private arguments remain unknown, it was evident that underlying issues were coming to a dangerous head. Angie, who had immigrated to the U.S. with hope and determination, found herself trapped in a marriage that had become increasingly volatile and unsafe. On the morning of January 11, 2023, surveillance footage captured Jared at Angie's workplace around 11:40 a.m. The video showed him entering the store, grabbing a beer, and leaving without paying. Even more alarming, he was seen drinking the beer in his car before driving away. This illegal act and erratic behavior suggested Jared was in a highly unstable mental state, possibly reflecting or preparing for what was to come. The footage provided critical insight, revealing a man acting irrationally just hours before an unthinkable crime. Jared's casual theft, his reckless drinking behind the wheel, and his escalating instability painted a picture of someone whose judgment was severely impaired. These actions foreshadowed a tragedy that would devastate two families and shock the Waller County community. Later that day, at approximately 4:35 p.m., Jared's parents made a 911 call that would change lives forever. They reported a possible death at their property, specifically inside the small cabin where Jared and Angie lived. Sheriff Troy Guidry later said Jared's father contacted authorities shortly after Jared entered the main house and made a disturbing comment, causing them to worry about Angie's safety. When Waller County deputies arrived, they encountered what Sheriff Troy described as a horrific scene. Inside the cabin, they found Angie's lifeless body near the bed, amidst evidence of extreme violence. She had suffered multiple stab wounds to her back, and the brutality of the attack was shocking. Blood was splattered throughout the cabin, and investigators discovered her body on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood. Disturbingly, her severed head was found in the shower. The severity of the violence left even seasoned law enforcement officers horrified. Crime scene investigators determined that a kitchen knife was used in the attack. Sheriff Troy confirmed that everything occurred on the property, and all evidence was recovered and submitted. The events of that day marked one of the most horrendous crimes in Waller County's history, leaving an indelible mark on the community and on everyone who knew Angie. The brutal and calculated nature of the violence, along with the disposal of Angie's body, shocked investigators. When deputies arrived at the crime scene, they found Jared still present on the property. Rather than fleeing or hiding his actions, he stayed at the location where he had committed the horrific crime. Jared and his parents were taken in for questioning, but it quickly became evident that Jared was solely responsible for the violent act. During his initial interview, Jared gave what Sheriff Troy described as a complete and straightforward confession, admitting to murdering his wife, Angie. While he described what he had done, he offered no explanation or motive for the senseless brutality. Jared confessed to killing Angie in their shared home. However, the lack of a clear motive left investigators and the community stunned. It was incomprehensible that a 21-year-old man could commit such a heinous act against his wife, whom he had married just 3 months earlier. The randomness and cruelty of the crime contradicted everything people believed about Jared and his relationship with Angie. The investigation revealed further disturbing details about the incident of January 11, 2023. Evidence indicated that Angie had fought desperately for her life. Multiple stab wounds to her back suggested that she had tried to flee or defend herself during the attack. Adding to the heartbreak was the discovery that Angie had reportedly been living in fear in the weeks leading up to her death. Prior calls to law enforcement hinted at rising tensions within the home, though no one had anticipated such a horrifying conclusion. For Angie's family in Nicaragua, the loss was beyond devastating. She had left her home country to create a better life and support her family's medical expenses, but her dreams ended in an unimaginable tragedy. Her mother, already battling cancer, now faced the overwhelming grief of losing her eldest daughter. The crime scene investigation lasted several days as law enforcement meticulously gathered evidence to piece together what had happened in the cabin that afternoon. Although the physical evidence detailed the brutal tragedy, the deeper psychological and emotional factors behind Jared's actions remained unclear. When Jared was charged with murder and booked into the Waller County Jail, the community began to confront the reality of how domestic violence could escalate to such a serious level. Although there had been prior warnings, including domestic disturbance reports and concerning behavior from Jared, no one foresaw the violence that ultimately unfolded. The investigation also shed light on Angie's life and the dreams that were tragically cut short. Friends and colleagues shared memories of her ambition, dedication to her family, and pride in her work as a fitness coach. Her untimely death felt even more tragic, as it robbed her of a bright future and a positive impact she had been making on those around her. As the trial progresses, many questions remain about Jared's motive for committing this horrific crime. Although further details about Jared's mental state and behavior emerged during the investigation, the fundamental question of why this tragedy occurred remained only partially answered. With Jared in custody and having confessed to the crime, attention turned to the legal process that would decide his fate. However, no outcome could restore the life lost or ease the grief of Angie's loved ones, who had envisioned a brighter future for her in America. The case immediately raised important questions about domestic violence, mental health, and the systems meant to protect vulnerable individuals. Just months before the crime, Jared had been arrested for DWI and exhibited violent behavior during that incident, yet no system intervened to prevent him from continuing to pose a threat to Angie. Following his arrest and confession, investigators closely examined Jared's background and mental health to understand what led to the tragedy. During the pre-trial phase, Jared's mental health and competency to stand trial became significant concerns. The Waller County Criminal District Attorney's Office acknowledged questions about his mental state. This prompted a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation to determine if Jared could comprehend the charges and participate in his defense. After a thorough assessment, the psychiatrist concluded that, despite any mental health issues, Jared was competent to stand trial. This determination allowed the legal process to proceed, holding Jared fully accountable for his actions. Initially, he was held on a $500,000 bond, but Waller County Criminal District Attorney Sean G. Whitmore argued that this amount was inadequate given the severity of the crime. Citing the brutal nature of Angie's murder and Jared's history of violent behavior, Sean petitioned for the bond to be increased to $1 million. The district attorney's request was supported by Jared's past actions, including his threats against police officers and jail staff during his arrest 2 months prior. These incidents highlighted Jared's violent tendencies, especially under stress or the influence of substances, and emphasized the public safety risk he posed. After hearing both sides, the judge approved raising the bond to $1 million and ordered an additional mental health evaluation to further assess Jared's psychological state before trial. As legal proceedings moved forward, District Attorney Whitmore worked closely with Angie's family to understand their feelings and priorities. While grieving and organizing the repatriation of Angie's remains to Nicaragua, the family expressed a desire for justice without enduring a prolonged and painful trial. Prosecutors and defense attorneys began discussions on a plea agreement that could resolve the case without a trial. This agreement aimed to secure a significant prison sentence for Jared while sparing Angie's family the trauma of revisiting the tragic details in court. The negotiations were challenging, requiring a balance between the severity of the crime, the legal process, and the family's wishes. Prosecutors sought a resolution that acknowledged the heinous nature of the crime while offering closure to those grieving Angie. Meanwhile, the community grappled with the broader implications of the tragedy. Domestic violence advocates used the case to raise awareness about recognizing warning signs and supporting individuals in potentially dangerous relationships. The multiple visits by law enforcement to Jared and Angie's home before the murders were a clear warning that domestic violence can escalate over time and often leads to serious consequences. On July 31, 2024, more than a year after Angie's death, Jared James Deacus appeared in court before Judge Gary Cheney to finalize a plea agreement that resolved the case. Jared pleaded guilty to murdering his wife, resulting in a 40-year prison sentence in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division. As part of this agreement, Jared gave up his right to appeal the verdict, waived potential defenses, including insanity, and forfeited his ability to file future habeas corpus petitions. This significantly reduces his chances of appealing his sentence. Jared will not be eligible for parole until at least 2043, meaning he is set to spend decades behind bars. As District Attorney of Whitmore County explained, being eligible does not mean being guaranteed a pardon. If denied, Jared could spend even more time in prison. Angie's family was heavily consulted throughout the process to ensure their wishes were respected. They agreed to the plea deal, believing it honored Angie's memory and allowed them the closure needed to begin healing. At the sentencing, the emotional toll on Angie's family and community was evident. District Attorney Whitmore reiterated Waller County's commitment to combating domestic violence, stating that Waller County does not tolerate domestic violence and that crimes like this would not go unanswered. He emphasized that they would fight for victims and hold perpetrators accountable. He also praised the Waller County Sheriff's Office for their thorough investigation and commitment to justice. For Angie's family, the sentencing marked the end of a painful legal process, but also the beginning of the long road to healing. While nothing could bring Angie back, knowing Jared was held accountable brought a measure of justice. At the same time, they faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives while carrying the weight of their loss. This case highlighted the devastating impact of domestic violence and the importance of recognizing warning signs, such as the concerning behavior Jared exhibited before the murder, missed opportunities to intervene, such as prior police calls to their home, Jared's violent actions during a DWI arrest, and reports of possessive behavior underscored the need for greater awareness and proactive measures. In the aftermath, community groups and domestic violence advocates used Angie's story to educate others about the warning signs of abusive relationships and resources available to those at risk. Her tragic death became a catalyst for discussions about protecting vulnerable individuals and preventing similar tragedies. The case also shed light on the complex relationship between mental health and criminal accountability. While Jared's mental health was acknowledged during the trial, the court deemed him competent and held him fully responsible for his actions. This affirmed the principle that mental health challenges cannot excuse or justify acts of violence, even when they provide context for the behavior. When Jared began his sentence, Angie's family focused on honoring her memory and supporting others facing similar struggles. They collaborated with community organizations to raise awareness about domestic violence and ensured Angie's story served as both a warning and inspiration for change. While the legal system brought justice in this case, the ultimate goal should be prevention, protecting young women like Angie before they fall victim to such violence. Those who knew Angie remember her as a hopeful, ambitious young woman who loved her family deeply. Her tragic death, at just 21, represents not only a personal loss to her loved ones, but also a collective loss to the community. Angie's dreams, dedication to supporting her family, and success as a fitness coach highlight the bright future taken from her. Ultimately, she will not be remembered solely as a victim of domestic violence, but as a determined, hard-working young woman who came to America seeking a better life for herself and her family. District Attorney Whitmore emphasized that they would seek justice for victims of domestic violence and send a message to perpetrators that in their jurisdiction, they fight for their victims. Angie's case, he noted, underscores both the critical need for this fight and the devastating consequences of unchecked violence. He stated that her memory would continue to inspire efforts to prevent such tragedies and assist those in need of safety and support to escape dangerous situations. Nanette Krentel grew up in New Orleans in a humble, close-knit family. Her parents, Dan and Pat Watson, raised her along with her siblings Kim, Eliza, and 3 half-siblings and taught her important values of loyalty and kindness, known for her gentle and caring nature. Nanette had a deep love for animals and shared her home with 2 cats and a dog. Despite moving away, she maintained a close bond with her family, especially her father and sisters, speaking with them daily. In 1994, at 27 years old, Nanette met Steve Krentel while applying for a job at his office supply store. Steve, then 28, owned both a scuba gear business and the store, and was going through a divorce at the time. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic. and after Steve finalized his divorce, he introduced Nanette to his young son, Justin. By 1995, they were married. Steve's native of Louisiana. He grew up near Lacombe and reportedly had a tense relationship with his brother, Brian. In 2000, Steve and Nanette moved to Lacombe, closer to his parents. He gradually worked his way up in the Tammany Parish Fire Department, eventually becoming the fire chief. Respected for his professionalism, his career in the fire department provided him with financial security and influence in the community. In 1997, after Steve sold both of his businesses, Nanette shifted her career path. She began working at a daycare center, where her kind and attentive nature earned the trust of parents and co-workers. Beyond her job, she became involved in the community, organizing fundraisers and charitable events, as well as supporting local fire departments by selling handmade ceramics and baked goods. By 2017, she had been out of the workforce for several years, focusing instead on her home, her pets, and continued community involvement. Although she had no children, Nanette was always concerned and attentive to the lives of her loved ones. She often played a central role in family matters, offering emotional and financial support to her loved ones. To outsiders, she and Steve seemed to lead a peaceful life, residing on 100 acres of scenic remote property in Lacombe. However, behind closed doors, Nanette grew increasingly concerned for her safety after Steve's brother, Brian, was released from prison. Brian allegedly blamed Nanette for the legal issues that led to his incarceration and had made direct threats against her. In response, she urged for additional security measures, having cameras installed around the property and keeping protective tools in her bedroom, car, and purse. She openly shared her fears with her family. Her father and sisters, aware of the escalating tension, were alarmed but did not anticipate just how grave the situation would become. Steve was also concerned and worked with Nanette to increase security. He installed additional cameras, purchased self-defense equipment, and even practiced shooting with her at a local shooting range. However, despite these precautions, the simmering problems in their family did not go away. Behind the facade of a peaceful life, there were bitter family conflicts, growing tensions, and the choices ahead led to unforeseen consequences. On July 14, 2017, at around 2:30 p.m., the St. Tammany Parish Fire Department received an urgent call from Steve's cousin, who lived nearby. He reported seeing thick smoke rising from Steve's property and suspected the house was on fire. Despite the distance between their homes and the dense forest in between, the fire was visible from afar. Steve and his team arrived at the scene around 3 p.m. when the house was engulfed in flames. Firefighters worked into the evening to extinguish the fire, only to discover human remains in the bathroom of the master bedroom. The damage was extensive, but the location of the remains and the fact that no one else lived there indicated the victim was likely Nanette, Steve's wife. No alarms had sounded, and throughout the day, Steve's repeated calls to both Nanette's cell phone and the house landline had gone unanswered. Her car remained in the garage, further confirming she had been home at the time of the fire. Tragically, all the household pets also perished, reflecting the sudden and intense nature of the flames. Federal fire investigation specialists joined the inquiry. Initially, the fire was considered a possible accident, but the circumstances surrounding Nanette's death raised suspicions. Her remains were found in the bathroom, and there was no indication she had tried to escape. This prompted a forensic autopsy, which included DNA testing and an investigation into the cause of death. About a week later, during a memorial service, part of the coroner's preliminary findings became public. It was revealed that Nanette had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, with a bullet found in her skull. This discovery completely shifted the direction of the investigation. On July 18th, the sheriff confirmed the findings, apologized for the delay in communication, and acknowledged evidence of a criminal act. Further autopsy results showed no smoke inhalation in Nanette's lungs, proving that she had died before the fire. Since no weapon was found near her body, the possibility of self-inflicted injuries has been ruled out. The investigation further revealed the presence of 9 security cameras on the property, but Steve stated that the system had stopped functioning several days before the fire. Efforts to recover footage from the damaged equipment were unsuccessful. This lack of evidence, combined with forensic findings, suggested the fire had been intentionally set to destroy evidence. Investigators shifted their focus to individuals who might have had both motive and access to the property. However, an official statement confirming foul play in Nanette's death was not released until 4 days after the fire. The family's frustration with the investigation grew, particularly because the coroner had noted the gunshot wound the day after the incident, yet this information wasn't immediately shared with them. Nanette's sister, Kim, a prosecutor in Nebraska, publicly criticized the investigation, pointing to the lack of proper scene containment, which may have compromised evidence. When Nanette's relatives arrived in Louisiana shortly after the tragedy, they found the property unsecured and the house open. Within 2 days, Steve was allowed to return to the site, raising concerns about evidence being altered or lost. It wasn't until Steve's son, Justin, discovered a fragment of a human skull in the debris that authorities finally secured the scene. The incident has left the public losing confidence in Sheriff Randy Smith's department. While federal investigators conduct an independent analysis, they discovered multiple points of ignition and traces of accelerants, confirming the fire was deliberately set. Despite these findings, however, the sheriff did not rule out the possibility that Julie harmed herself, citing the lack of a recovered weapon and inconclusive ballistics test results. Later, 2 firearms were found in the remains of the home, but neither could be definitively linked to the fatal shot. The bullet recovered from Nanette's skull was too damaged for reliable analysis. Additional forensic tests reinforced previous findings, including finding no smoke in Nanette's lungs and no food in her stomach. Despite her having been seen purchasing food at a fast food restaurant that morning, additional inconsistencies came to light during the investigation. There was no blood on Nanette's gunshot wound to the head, as is often the case, leading to speculation that her body may have been moved after her death. An independent expert suggested that whoever moved her was likely familiar with the layout of the house. The sheriff, however, publicly disputed the forensic expert's conclusions. This discrepancy with the findings of federal agents further undermined public confidence in the investigation. Nanette's family began openly questioning the integrity of local authorities and raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest. As discrepancies mounted, the sheriff was eventually compelled to issue a public statement, acknowledging that Nanette's death resulted from a violent act. Despite this admission, the investigation failed to identify the person responsible. The case shifted towards exploring possible motives and suspects with access to the property. Nanette's husband, Steve, was naturally a key subject of interest due to his unrestricted access to the house. He willingly cooperated, volunteered for a polygraph test, and passed. However, since polygraph results are not entirely reliable, investigators didn't eliminate him as a suspect. Steve's alibi was backed by fire department security footage confirming he was at work on the day of the incident, starting at 8 a.m., and didn't leave at any point, including during lunch. This was corroborated by surveillance footage and his co-workers' testimonies. However, it was noted that Steve, working on a Friday, was unusual, as he usually took that day off. Investigators also analyzed Nanette's movements on the morning of July 14th. Traffic cameras spotted her driving between her home and a nearby fast food restaurant, where her bank card was used to buy food. Her car was later seen near her house. About an hour later, a phone call was made from Nanette's phone to an unfamiliar number. The person on the other end claimed not to know her, and the reason for the call remains unexplained. Investigators explored potential personal conflicts and discovered that Steve had been in an extramarital relationship with a colleague. Nanette was aware of the affair and had told others she was considering divorce, which under state law would involve dividing their shared assets, an arrangement that could have been financially disadvantageous for Steve. When questioned, Steve admitted to the affair but claimed the couple had reconciled and planned to stay together. Close family members were also questioned. Steve's son, Justin, had reportedly experienced tension with his stepmother, Julie. In the past, family acquaintances described him as having unusual interests, including a fascination with firearms. However, Justin provided documentation proving he was out of state for work on the day of the incident, which was verified, ruling him out as a suspect. Investigators also looked into Steve's brother, Brian, who had a criminal record and a history of family conflicts. Over the years, Nanette had voiced concerns about his behavior. Shortly after his release from prison, she sent her sister a message describing a specific threat from him, in which he allegedly displayed aggressiveness and hinted at setting the house on fire. These claims were corroborated through their text exchanges. Surveillance footage from their parents' home showed Brian did not leave the premises on the day of Nanette's death. However, a wearable tracking device issued to him malfunctioned and failed to record any location data that day, with the cause of this failure unexplained. Another puzzling incident occurred a month before Nanette's death. A security camera recorded an unidentified man near the entrance gate of the property. He left behind a cigarette butt and a knife. Nanette informed her father about the incident, but the man's identity remained unclear and no investigation was conducted to find out more. After investigating multiple leads, the case remained unsolved. Every suspect either had a confirmed alibi or there wasn't enough evidence to make a formal accusation, leaving the investigation at a dead end. 2 months after Nanette's death, the sheriff made another public announcement. He declared that Steve was no longer a person of interest in the case, explaining that Steve's alibi had been verified. There was no clear motive, and the evidence was deemed insufficient to move forward. However, Nanette's family felt this announcement was premature, as not all digital records had been reviewed. Several witnesses had yet to be re-interviewed, and a detailed timeline of her phone activity leading up to her death was still incomplete. It appeared the investigation was entering a state of stagnation. When Nanette's family requested access to the case documents, their attempts were met with vague responses. Louisiana state law restricts access to investigative materials to the closest next of kin, which in this case was Steve, not Nanette's parents or sisters. Steve did not share these documents with the rest of the family. In search of answers, Nanette's relatives turned to private attorneys and independent forensic experts. One expert, after examining the available evidence, identified signs of deliberate investigative mismanagement, noting that critical protocols for handling cases involving violent deaths and burnt evidence had been disregarded. The conclusions and methodologies of the private experts sharply contrasted with those of the local authorities. Efforts to transfer the case to a different jurisdiction proved unsuccessful. Appeals to the district attorney's office were dismissed, with officials citing a lack of legal justification to relocate the investigation. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Nanette's family turned to social media, launching a page to provide updates and highlight inconsistencies in the investigation, in the hope of pressuring authorities into action. However, the sheriff's actions became a significant obstacle to achieving transparency. His public statements, dismissal of expert findings, and personal connections to individuals potentially linked to the case raised concerns about his impartiality and deepened public mistrust. Despite multiple individuals with potential motives, the investigation failed to reach a definite conclusion. Detectives worked on verifying alibis, analyzing technical records, and identifying gaps in the official narrative. But these efforts often revealed inconsistencies that undermined the credibility of the evidence. A key issue was the absence of location data from the Jeep's-enabled ankle monitor worn by Brian. On July 14th, the day of the incident, the monitor registered no location data, an unexplained blackout. Authorities were unable to determine whether the failure was a technical error or whether the monitor had been intentionally disabled. This missing data represented a major accountability failure and raised serious questions. Another troubling discovery came from a review of footage from a security camera inside Brian's parents' home. The video depicted Brian with a working desk lamp and a visible wall clock in the background, ostensibly providing an alibi. However, Nanette's family questioned the authenticity of this footage, suggesting it could have been pre-recorded or staged. Experts also observed that the angle and focus of the camera appeared unusual for a standard household surveillance setup. Additional uncertainty arose with surveillance footage from a fast food establishment showing Nanette's vehicle. Investigators assumed she was driving the car that morning, but the video quality was too poor to verify her identity. This assumption was based solely on her bank card being used to make a purchase nearby. The situation was further complicated by the fact that there was no footage from her home surveillance system on the day of the incident. Steve claimed the cameras had not been operational at the time, but investigators later found traces of accelerant on the damaged equipment. Experts concluded that the security system had likely been intentionally tampered with before the fire, suggesting someone with knowledge of the camera's locations and purpose had interfered. After Nanette's father passed away, her sisters took the lead in demanding a proper investigation. They launched an online awareness campaign, collaborated with advocacy groups, and participated in discussions on crime-focused platforms. The family repeatedly urged state authorities to transfer the case to an independent investigative body, but their requests were consistently met with generic responses that lacked meaningful action. They were also frustrated by the investigators' failure to review footage from the citywide surveillance system, which could have offered critical context. These shortcomings formed the basis of formal complaints to the district attorney's office. Although officials promised to keep the case open, there was no evidence of real progress, receiving minimal support from local law enforcement. Nanette's family shifted their focus to building a network of allies. They connected with organizations specializing in unresolved cases, which led to increased attention on Nanette's death through podcasts, videos, and media coverage. By 2024, the case remained unsolved. However, new hope appeared when Colin Sims was elected district attorney. Colin publicly expressed his willingness to review the evidence, marking the first sign of possible investigative progress after nearly 7 years of inaction. As of March 2024, Nanette's case was still open, with no charges filed against any suspects. Despite coroner findings, witness testimonies, and independent assessments, authorities in St. Tammany Parish had yet to identify any responsible parties. What initially seemed like a straightforward case had instead devolved into a prolonged stalemate. By mid-2025, the case records were still sealed, and only individuals with legal standing, such as Nanette's husband, Steve, were granted access. The family remained barred from reviewing complete investigative reports, transcripts, or relevant surveillance data. Repeated appeals to state authorities went unanswered. In response, a grassroots group formed by Nanette's friends and family continued to provide social media updates, urging the public to come forward with any useful information. The family also sought assistance from federal agencies like the Department of Justice. In their letters, they raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest involving local authorities and petitioned for the case to be transferred to a higher jurisdiction. Independent experts consulted by the family identified numerous investigative avenues that had not been fully explored, including recovering deleted digital records and re-interviewing key witnesses. However, without official investigative authority, these proposals could not be enforced. Despite years of stagnation, Nanette's family has never stopped fighting for answers. For them, this is about more than personal grief. It is a pursuit of justice. The lack of progress has only strengthened their resolve. They firmly believe the truth can still be uncovered if independent expertise is brought in and the case is reviewed impartially. As of this report, the case remains open but inactive. Nanette Krentel's story highlights how errors, delays, and possible bias can obstruct justice in a major case. Yet, it also demonstrates the unwavering resilience of a family determined to keep her memory alive. Their goal remains unchanged: to uncover the truth, no matter how much time has passed or how many obstacles stand in their way. It was a calm night in the semi-rural Melbourne suburb of Mornington. A small family was getting ready for bed. A pregnant mother was sleeping upstairs, her little girl was tucked in her bed, and the father was quietly moving around the house. Everything seemed normal, no loud arguments, no signs of trouble. By the next morning, things were seriously wrong. What really took place that night? John Miles Sharp was born on February 28, 1967, in the small coastal town of Mornington, Victoria. He was the middle child in a large family with 6 siblings. Unlike his siblings, John was quite different. He was withdrawn, quiet, and struggled with extreme shyness. From a young age, he found social situations overwhelming, which often left him feeling drained. While his brothers and sisters easily made friends and played with others, John stayed on the sidelines, dealing with anxiety and feeling out of place. His closest relationships were with his parents, as he found the outside world to be unfriendly and unwelcoming. School was not a refuge for him. He had a few classmates he talked to, but no genuine friendships and no one to share his thoughts with. Nonetheless, he persevered and graduated. By the 1990s, he found a job at the Commonwealth Bank, and that's when everything started to change. Anna Kemp entered John's life like a ray of sunshine. She was cheerful, outgoing, and full of energy, a confident, intelligent woman from New Zealand. At 27, John was younger than Anna, who was 31. Despite their differences, they were drawn to each other. Anna's warmth complemented John's quiet steadiness. Working together every day allowed them to grow closer, and soon they fell in love. After a year of dating, they officially became a couple and married in October 1994. Although Anna was far from her family in New Zealand, she maintained a strong connection with them, especially her mother. They often spoke on the phone, sharing love, encouragement, and updates about her new life in Australia. Anna came from a deeply religious background, and her faith was a strong foundation for her life. For her, marriage was not just a legal contract, but a sacred commitment. After the ceremony, once they settled in and the honeymoon phase passed, Anna began to notice something she hadn't recognized before. John had changed. He became quieter, colder, and emotionally distant. She later shared with friends and family that it felt like something vital had been turned off. The relationship suddenly felt empty, lacking passion. Although John would have outbursts of anger, Anna remained committed because she believed in their vows, in making an effort, and in the importance of giving it time. In August 2002, Anna experienced immense joy with the birth of her daughter, Gracie. Becoming a mother was one of the happiest moments of her life. However, shortly after Gracie was born, doctors diagnosed her with hip dysplasia, which meant she needed to wear a corrective orthopedic brace for the first 3 months. This made for a difficult start. Anna spent sleepless nights caring for Gracie and adjusting to her new role as a mother. In contrast, John struggled to connect with their daughter. From the beginning, he was distant, showing no warmth or affection. Multiple sources indicated that he felt resentment towards Gracie, even going so far as to call her a harsh name that revealed a troubling lack of empathy. Her cries frustrated him, and her needs interrupted his life. The marriage was falling apart. Anna shared with her family that there was constant tension in the house. Communication was minimal, and even minor decisions turned into arguments. She wondered if their difficulties were due to lack of sleep or if they were simply going through a tough time. Anna hoped that as Gracie got older, things would improve. Unfortunately, the situation only grew more unstable. Shortly after Gracie was born, John made a significant choice. He quit his job at the bank. He began working from home as a conveyancer, handling the legal paperwork for real estate transactions. This change provided him with flexibility and independence. He operated his business from a small office in their home. becoming even more isolated than before as he was already a withdrawn person. As time passed, Anna noticed that John's choice wasn't driven by ambition, but rather by a desire to escape. He was struggling with the pressures of his job, the extended hours, relentless demands, and interactions with others. John found this environment overwhelming, as he was not naturally social. Dealing with clients, leading a team, and navigating a busy workplace exhausted him more than he admitted. Now, he was trying to avoid it all. In September 2003, a significant change occurred for the family. John and Anna purchased a new house. This house was bigger and located just a few streets from John's childhood home, where his parents still resided. While it seemed like the start of a new chapter, the atmosphere inside felt different. Instead of laughter, the walls of their new home were filled with silence. The tension between John and Anna was not only present, it was intensifying. In November, Anna discovered she was pregnant again, this time with a boy. She was excited and shared the news with a close friend. Their little girl, Gracie, would soon have a sibling. However, John's reaction crushed that dream. He didn't smile, hug her, or show any joy. Instead, he questioned whether the baby was really his. Anna later shared with her loved ones that John harbored resentment. Instead of celebrating the news of the second pregnancy, he reacted with cold irritation. He wasn't simply indifferent, he was deeply troubled. To him, the pregnancy felt like an added burden rather than a blessing. He began to struggle emotionally, finding it hard to sleep and hardly speaking to anyone. He withdrew into himself, becoming increasingly silent and irritable. Eventually, he consulted a doctor and was diagnosed with insomnia. Although he was given sleeping pills, they were ineffective. Night after night, he lay awake in darkness, consumed by thoughts that told him everything was going wrong, that life was overwhelming, that no one understood him, and that it would be easier if he didn't have to keep up the facade of being a supportive husband, father, and man who had everything under control. On March 23, 2004, Anna was in her second trimester of pregnancy. That day, the whole family, John, Anna, and Gracie, went to a birthday party for their nephew. To everyone else, they seemed like an ideal family. Anna had already picked out a name for the baby, Francis. Even a close friend who had been staying with them that week noticed nothing out of the ordinary. They looked like any typical family. The next morning, Anna dropped Gracie off at nursery school as usual. Later that day, she called a friend, and they arranged to meet in a few days. The day after that, she reached out to her private health insurer to add her unborn child to her policy. 2 days later, on March 23rd, an argument occurred. The specifics of the conversation are unclear, but it was serious. That night, after the argument, they went to bed around 9 to 10 p.m. Anna was likely asleep when John got up, walked downstairs to the garage, and retrieved a spear gun. He then returned to the bedroom and shot his pregnant wife in the left temple. When she did not die immediately, he shot her again. Afterward, he covered her bloodied body with a blanket and went downstairs to sleep on the couch. The entire incident took only a few minutes. The next morning, John got up, dressed Gracie, and took her to nursery as if everything was normal. He started to fabricate a story, claiming that Anna had left him for another man and that she intended to come back in a few days to pick up Gracie. However, Anna's family didn't believe him. They tried to reach her through calls and messages, but received no response. This silence was incredibly frustrating for her mother, as Anna had always been in touch, even when she traveled abroad. Now, there was only silence. Worried and increasingly frantic, Anna's mother reached out to her local parish priest in New Zealand, who had known the family for many years. She explained that she hadn't heard from Anna since Monday, despite sending messages that had gone unread. The priest noticed her distress and recognized that Anna's silence meant something was wrong. He decided to take action and contacted the police in New Zealand. As a parish priest and a respected member of the community, his worries were treated with utmost seriousness. Soon, investigators would start uncovering the truth behind John's elaborate deception, revealing a situation much more troubling than anyone could have expected. Initially, Authorities did not regard the situation as a criminal case. They believed that Anna might just need some time alone, possibly to avoid difficult conversations or feelings of embarrassment. However, as days passed, her silence became increasingly concerning. The New Zealand police decided to take the situation more seriously and transferred the case to Australian officials. Officers in Victoria were then asked to conduct a welfare check at Anna's home in Mornington. Anna had a meeting planned with a close friend on March 26th, with the time and location already confirmed. However, before the meeting could take place, an unusual event unfolded. The friend received a phone call from John, who informed her that Anna would not be attending. He shared the same story he had told others, that Anna had left him and Gracie for another man. The friend was shocked. She had known Anna for years, and they had shared everything, so this news was hard to believe. Nevertheless, she felt a strong instinct to not ignore what she had heard. As concerns about him grew, John was busy hiding his actions. He had purchased the spear gun since early 2003, claiming he needed it for fishing. Although he never used it, he paid in cash, leaving no evidence of the purchase. On the night he killed Anna, he slept on the sofa. The next morning, he prepared Gracie and took her to nursery just like any other day. When he came back home, Anna's body was still upstairs. He attempted to remove the spears from her skull, but only succeeded in unscrewing the metal tips. The blades remained embedded. He then dragged her body to the backyard and buried it in a shallow grave. Life continued as usual, at least outwardly. By Saturday, 4 days after Anna's death, John was still acting as though everything was normal. He followed his usual schedule, dropping Gracie off at nursery, picking her up, making her dinner, and putting her to bed. However, that evening, once she was asleep, a darker side of him emerged. He started drinking. John was preparing to commit another terrible act. This time, it was against his own daughter. When he felt ready, he took a spear gun from the garage and shot his daughter in the head, penetrating her skull. As the child was injured and screaming, John retrieved the 2 spear shafts he had earlier removed from his wife's head and returned to the bedroom. He shot both spears into Gracie's head, but she was still alive, so he removed 1 spear and shot again, finally killing her. The next morning, John returned to the bedroom and pulled the 2 spears out of her head. He then wrapped her body in a garbage bag and a tarpaulin and dumped her body at the Mornington Waste Transfer Station. He also disposed of the spear gun, the spears, some of Gracie's clothes, and toys. In the days that followed, John made an effort to maintain his deception. He accessed Anna's email account and began sending messages to her friends and family, pretending to be her. He wrote that she was happy, in love, and pregnant again with her new partner. If anyone questioned his story, John would say she had her phone. Something felt off to those who knew Anna well. The emails she sent were unusual. Their tone was inappropriate, cold, and mechanical, lacking the warmth, humor, and affection that defined her. Although the words resembled her writing style, the essence was missing. John might have thought that being far away in New Zealand would shield him and allow him to control the situation. Then, unexpectedly, the doorbell rang. Police officers from Victoria stood at his door. John appeared surprised, but remained composed. He recited a well-prepared account of events. He said Anna had left on March 23rd, returned a week later to pick up Gracie, and that he had only seen her a few times since. He claimed they had discussed separation, the baby, and their futures. He insisted that Anna no longer loved him and that the baby wasn't his. He tried to project an image of a hurt man, betrayed and abandoned. He wanted others to see him as the victim, but deep down, he sensed the instability beneath him. That same day, after the police had visited, John went to a hardware store. He bought duct tape, 2 tarpaulins, and a chainsaw. Once home, he dug up Anna's body from the shallow grave in the backyard and dismembered her. He wrapped the body parts in tarpaulin and duct tape, then drove them to the dump to dispose of them. He replaced the blood-stained mattress and got rid of Gracie's cot to keep up the facade that Anna was still alive. He continued to access her email and sent messages from her account. He even used her bank card to buy flowers for her mother, pretending they were from Anna, a disturbing act to maintain the illusion. The truth was starting to surface. A police investigation was ongoing, and the media had picked up on the story. In a shocking moment that captured the nation's attention, John appeared on live television. He pleaded for Anna to return home, asking her to call or give any indication that she and Gracie were safe. He expressed his love for them, stating how much he missed them and that he still cared. John wasn't genuinely grieving. He was pretending. At that moment, he had already given a written statement to the police, claiming he had nothing to do with Anna and Gracie's disappearance. He repeated his story to everyone. Anna had left, but the investigators didn't believe him. Although they lacked sufficient evidence to arrest him, they decided to keep him under surveillance. They followed him to Chelsea Beach, the place where John had said Anna had gone. There, he has left something in the bushes. After he left, the officers moved in to search the area. What they discovered changed everything. Hidden in the bushes were Anna's mobile phone and bank card. John had been using her items to maintain his lie. He returned to that spot regularly to create a false trail and support his deception. But now he had been caught. John Sharp was arrested and charged with the murders of his wife, Anna, and their daughter, Gracie. Initially, he maintained his innocence, repeatedly denying any involvement. However, as the investigation intensified and the questioning became more pressing, John eventually confessed to killing both Anna, who was 41, and Gracie, who was just 20 months old. After his confession, police began a large-scale search of the local landfill based on his information. They sifted through every ton of waste by hand for 3 weeks. On July 6, 2004, they discovered the bodies. The grim reality was now clear. When asked about his actions, John didn't show any regret. Instead, he shifted the blame to Anna. He told the police that she was moody, controlling, and unhappy. John claimed that Anna prevented him from seeing his family as often as he wished and insisted that their marriage was already over. He thought he could raise Gracie alone, but later confessed he was scared of being a single father and felt overwhelmed by her crying. He also admitted that he had never really bonded with her. During the trial, a forensic psychiatrist described John as socially awkward and deeply withdrawn, unable to face his own problems. Experts believed he saw his home life as a prison from which he couldn't escape. He lacked the skills to resolve conflicts, communicate effectively, or seek help. John told doctors that during the murders, he felt like a different person, but tests showed no signs of psychosis. He was aware of his actions. The psychiatrist found that John was experiencing moderate depression, which affected his perception of reality but didn't completely impair his judgment. During the sentencing, the judge delivered a strong condemnation, calling the murders premeditated and cruel. He pointed out that John had killed his wife out of resentment and referred to Gracie as a defenseless child who depended on him both legally and morally. On August 5, 2005, the court sentenced John Sharp to 2 consecutive life terms, with a non-parole period of 33 years. In court, he sat with his head down, breathing heavily and wiping away tears, not for Anna or Gracie, but for himself. Following his conviction, more disturbing details came to light. Members of John's extended family disclosed that he had abused a young relative for 2 years, only stopping when she turned 18. The victim expressed that the most painful part wasn't just the abuse itself, but the realization that if she had spoken out sooner, perhaps Anna and Gracie would still be alive. After the trial, 3 more individuals came forward, claiming John had previously behaved inappropriately around children, both within the family and in other close settings. For years, no one spoke up. The victims, still children at the time, were too frightened. It was only after the murders that they finally found the courage to break their silence. John's relatives say that Anna was unaware of his past when they got married, but she later might have learned something. Both Anna and Gracie were buried under Anna's maiden name, Kemp. There was also a name engraved on the stone, Francis, their unborn son who never had a chance. Even though he never drew breath, he is remembered. The crimes committed by John shocked Australia and the world. A father who harmed the very people he was supposed to protect. He left behind deep sorrow and unanswered questions that may never be resolved. John resides in protective custody while incarcerated due to threats on his life from fellow prisoners. Molly Nicole Watson was born on December 15, 1982, in Moberly, Missouri. Her parents, Timothy and Sandy, and her brother Tim, have always created a warm and supportive home. Diagnosed with Asperger syndrome, Molly embraced her differences and forged ahead with resilience and determination. Those who have come into contact with her often describe her as energetic, creative, and extremely passionate. Molly earned a master's degree in psychology and dedicated her career to education. She lived in a colorful and creative world filled with Harry Potter books, comic novels, Disney characters, and intricate cosplay costumes. Her creativity even extended to designing her own nail polish line. Her home was her sanctuary, packed with books, fantasy, and the comforting presence of her 5 cats. She was a unique mix of strength and gentleness, calm yet unapologetically herself. In her mid-20s, Molly married, but the relationship ended in divorce after 2 years. Not long after, she discovered she was pregnant before her son was born. Molly began a new and unexpected chapter, a relationship with Amber Brady, a childhood acquaintance. Though not close when they were younger, reconnecting years later brought them together. Both women were fresh from failed marriages, and what began as a surprise blossomed into a meaningful and fulfilling partnership. When Molly gave birth to her son, Declan, who was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, Amber was by her side. Together, they supported each other through life's challenges. After her maternity leave, Molly began working at the Moberly Area Correctional Center, where she met James Addy, a married Navy veteran and corrections officer 16 years her senior. Despite their differences, Molly and James grew close. James confided in Molly, claiming that his marriage to his wife Melanie was ending. Believing him, Molly allowed their friendship to develop into a secret affair. They discreetly met in motels, hiding their relationship, Molly from Amber and James from his wife. The truth unraveled when Amber spotted Molly with James at a gas station. Growing suspicious, Amber eventually followed Molly to a motel and confronted her. That confrontation marked the end of Molly and Amber's relationship. Now free from the constraints of her past, Molly is openly dating James and is madly in love with him. However, her friends noticed something unusual. Molly paid all the bills, while James was cold, distant, and unwilling to commit fully. Despite this, Molly believed he was the one. In October 2017, James told Molly that his divorce had been finalized, filled with happiness and hope. Molly took the initiative and proposed. After James agreed, she threw herself into planning the wedding with joy and excitement. She envisioned a Disney-inspired celebration based on Beauty and the Beast, with burgundy and gold as her chosen colors. Molly hired a wedding planner, makeup artist, hairstylist, and even purchased 2 wedding dresses because she couldn't decide between them. She documented her journey on a new YouTube channel, radiating happiness as she shared her plans. Her eyes sparkled in her videos as she spoke with enthusiasm and sang softly in her princess-like voice. To Molly, the wedding felt like a real-life fairy tale. As the big day approached, however, life took a darker turn. At the end of 2017, James's ex-wife Melanie was involved in a severe car accident that left her on life support. James had to step in to care for their children, and Molly stood by him during this difficult time. They considered postponing their wedding, but ultimately decided to proceed with their plans. In April 2018, just days before their wedding, Melanie unexpectedly passed away. Despite the heartbreak, Molly pressed on, handling the final wedding arrangements alone, while James focused on planning Melanie's funeral. The situation was deeply tragic, but Molly remained determined to prepare for what she thought would be the happiest day of her life. Amid the grief, a surprising detail came to light. Melanie wasn't James's first or even second wife. She was his 4th. Before meeting Molly, James had been married multiple times. When they went to the courthouse to apply for their marriage license, the process turned uncomfortable. James appeared anxious, avoided direct answers about his marital history, and seemed reluctant to share details. Molly either didn't notice or chose to ignore these red flags. Her love for James outweighed any doubts or concerns. However, Molly never made it to the altar. On the night of April 27, 2018, just 2 days before the wedding, her body was found on a remote gravel road in Monroe County. What initially seemed like an accident quickly developed into a homicide investigation. At the scene, investigators found no evidence of a struggle, and none of Molly's belongings were missing. Her jewelry remained untouched. Inside her car, police discovered wedding-related documents, including plans and checklists, everything bearing the name James. These clues led them directly to James's home. Around 2:30 a.m., officers knocked on James's door. However, instead of meeting a grieving fiancé, they encountered a woman, his wife, Melanie. This was shocking because Melanie was supposed to have died just days earlier in a hospital after a severe car accident. As it turned out, James had fabricated the entire story about Melanie's death. She was alive and still married to him, yet he had simultaneously planned to marry Molly. Both James and Melanie were taken in for questioning. Initially, detectives did not realize that Melanie was the woman James claimed was dead, only that they were dealing with James, who was allegedly involved in a murder while still married. Melanie, on the other hand, was blindsided. Melanie knew who Molly was, but thought she was just one of James's co-workers. When questioning turned to Molly's death, Melanie assumed the police were merely speaking to people who knew her. The truth came as a devastating shock. Melanie had no idea that her husband had been unfaithful, let alone engaged to another woman. James's double life had been so carefully hidden that Melanie, who lived in the same house as him, never suspected a thing. She told investigators that James came home every night like clockwork and showed no signs of dissatisfaction or a secret life. In hindsight, she began recalling suspicious details, such as how he often arrived home 2 hours late, which he brushed off as extra work or traffic. She had never pushed for explanations, and only now did the pieces begin to fall into place. Police uncovered that James had been living a double life for years. To Molly, James had claimed he was in the process of getting divorced, but in truth, he had never even filed for divorce. When questioned about his marital status, he invented a dramatic story about how his wife, Melanie, had been in a terrible car accident, was in a coma, and later died. Molly believed him. She trusted the man she loved and had no reason to doubt his word. Using this fictional story to hide his shady past, James accepts Molly's proposal and plans a wedding with her that he knows will never happen. When James's deception finally came to light, investigators began treating him as a suspect. Melanie provided a timeline for the night Molly was murdered. James had told her he was meeting a friend at 7:30 p.m., but he returned home closer to an hour later, claiming his friend had cancelled. However, Melanie and their teenage daughter contradicted his story. They recalled James arriving home closer to 10 p.m., far later than he had claimed. The timeline wasn't the only issue. Their daughter remembered that James went straight to the shower when he got home and then immediately started a load of laundry. For detectives, this behavior was telling. It suggested that James might have been trying to clean evidence like blood, dirt, or gun residue from his clothes. His alibi quickly unraveled. Police arrested James and scheduled formal questioning for the next day. Melanie, devastated by James's infidelity and deceit, returned home after giving her statement. Despite her heartbreak, she had to maintain a facade of normalcy for her daughter, who was excitedly preparing for a school dance. But behind closed doors, Melanie began searching for answers. Her investigation led her to the attic, where she uncovered shocking secrets hidden in a trunk: photos, letters, souvenirs, and evidence of a double life her husband had lived for 7 years. James had taken trips with another woman, Molly, claiming they were work-related or outings with friends. The betrayal was overwhelming. Melanie stayed composed for her daughter, but privately, she was unraveling a terrifying truth. This was not just a case of infidelity, but something far darker: murder. For nearly a decade, James had juggled two relationships, maintaining two homes and nearly entering into two marriages. But it all came to light when Molly, his mistress, was found dead. James's teenage daughter, Emma, didn't learn about her father's secret life from him or her mother. Instead, she discovered the shocking truth through an online news article her classmates had seen. Her world, once private, was now laid bare for everyone to see. For a teenager, the humiliation was unbearable. Whispers, stares, and judgment followed her through school hallways. As the story made national headlines, Emma uncovered even more heartbreaking details about her father's betrayal, and Molly, the woman he had planned to marry. While reading news reports, Emma remembered she had met Molly before. Years earlier, her father had brought her to Molly's home to help sew a cosplay costume. At the time, Emma believed Molly was just a friend. Now, the memory seemed painfully clear as Emma and her mother, Melanie, struggled to come to terms with the betrayal. Law enforcement continued connecting the dots, building a case against James. At the scene of Molly's murder, investigators found tire tracks matching James's car. His vehicle had mud on it, consistent with the rural road where Molly had been killed. More damning evidence surfaced when they recovered a white t-shirt nearby, customized by Emma as a gift for her father. The t-shirt contained traces of gunpowder and Molly's DNA, making James the prime suspect. While the bullet that killed Molly was too damaged to be traced to a specific gun, the circumstantial evidence against James was strong. Phone records revealed that James had called Molly the night she died, speaking with her for 20 minutes near the site where her body was discovered. Additionally, Glenn McParron, the man who found Molly's body, testified that he had briefly encountered a white man, around 50 years old, near the scene that night. Prosecutors argued this man was James. Prosecutors argued that James's motive was fear. Molly had grown suspicious and had begun searching online for information about James's wife, Melanie. She found no obituaries or hospital records because Melanie was still alive. Once Molly discovered the truth, prosecutors believed James saw her as a threat to his secrets. Instead of ending the affair or confessing, he allegedly decided to silence Molly permanently. What made his crime so alarming wasn't just its brutality, but also its carelessness. James left a shirt designed by Emma at the crime scene and his name on documents in Molly's car. He behaved as if his actions couldn't be traced, but the evidence trail he left behind was glaring. The trial began on April 26, 2021, with prosecutors presenting tire tread analyses, forensic evidence, and witness testimonies to reveal the full scope of James's actions. Melanie testified, stating that she had no knowledge of her husband's affair and describing him as controlling, manipulative, and fully capable of murder. Emma's testimony added a chilling layer to an already disturbing case. She recalled her father, James, coming home late after 10 p.m. on the night of Molly's death. He went straight to the shower, and soon after, the washing machine started running. The strong smell of bleach filled the house. Emma remembered how nervous and on edge he seemed, behaving uncharacteristically. He lingered near her, silently, watching, then eventually walked away. Melanie revealed that during Molly's murder, she was still married to James, living under the same roof, and believing her life was normal. She had no idea her husband was leading a double life, using a separate phone to communicate with another woman. By the early hours of April 28, 2018, Melanie was grappling with an avalanche of devastating revelations. She discovered that her husband of more than 20 years had been planning to marry another woman. James had even fraudulently signed a marriage license, claiming to be divorced. The fantasy life he had woven with Molly was built on deception and ultimately ended in violence. Melanie had been unaware of his infidelity, that he had told others she was dead, and that her name was used to invent a fabricated tragedy. On the night of the murder, James had left their house in blue jeans, a black jacket, and boots. The next day, after the police left, Melanie began searching their home. Something felt off. She noticed his black jacket was missing, questioned him about it, but never got an answer. Her search led her to the garage, where James had parked a maroon car, unusually inside rather than outside, where he normally left it. Her suspicion deepened. During his trial, James Addy refused to testify in his defense, but submitted a written statement, a love letter to Molly, the same woman he stood accused of murdering. This act felt either disturbingly delusional or deeply arrogant. Later, he requested a new trial, claiming inadequate defense representation and alleging that some evidence in his favor had been withheld. However, the jury was unmoved. In July 2021, James Addy was convicted of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. He received a life sentence without parole, plus an additional 10 years. To the end, he declared his innocence and vowed to appeal. Reports surfaced of James confessing to a fellow inmate, bluntly stating that he ended up in prison because someone ended up face down in a ditch. By then, the damage was irreparable. In April 2018, instead of celebrating a wedding, Molly's family and friends gathered to bury her. What should have been the start of her new life became the date now etched on her headstone. But the tragedies didn't end there. In the ensuing months, her parents, Timothy and Sandy Watson, also passed away, unable to bear the devastation of losing their daughter. Sandy experienced severe psychological trauma after Molly's murder, and her mental health rapidly declined. Timothy, who devoted himself to caring for his wife during this time, succumbed to a heart attack in September 2020. The relentless stress, grief, and sorrow had taken its toll on him as well. Neither of them lived to see justice done or hear the guilty verdict in the courtroom. They were not there to witness the man responsible for their daughter's death being led away in handcuffs. Meanwhile, Molly's son, Declan, was left without a mother. After her death, ensuring his care became a priority. Thankfully, he was placed with relatives who were raising him in a loving and supportive home. A small glimmer of hope in an otherwise heartbreaking story. Tim, Molly's brother, now acts as the spokesperson for their family. In court, he addressed the jury with not only grief, but also a profound sense of urgency. He spoke of the devastating impact of Molly's murder, how the loss of his younger sister had not only been a terrible shock, but had also brought with it the loss of his parents. He shared how his mother had succumbed to mental illness, his father had passed away from grief, and how the absence of his 3 loved ones had left a painful void in his life where there had once been joy. Tim implored the jury to deliver justice, emphasizing that Molly had dreams, a career, and a son. She had been a bright, passionate individual full of life, but everything was taken from her in a single, selfish act. Tim told the jury that James had mercilessly chosen to take Molly's life and urged them to deliver a verdict that showed no mercy to him in return. It was a quiet evening in Bristol, just after 8 p.m., when things took a dark turn inside a home. The shouting grew louder, followed by a sudden silence. A young child stood at the top of the stairs, watching what no child should ever see. Someone lying on the kitchen floor downstairs, bleeding. The other person was already trying to hide what had happened. This wasn't just a fight. It was the breaking point of a relationship full of jealousy, anger, and years of warning signs. No one expected that night to end in tragedy, but when the truth came out, it shocked everyone. Abigail White was born in 1998 and raised in Bristol, England. The early chapters of her life were defined not by innocence or joy, but by chaos and abuse. From a young age, Abigail found herself in a home dominated by violence. Her father was abusive, routinely harming her mother. Though her parents eventually divorced, any hope for peace was short-lived. Abigail's mother entered a new relationship, and a new man moved into the home. Instead of stability, the cycle of abuse continued, with the new man creating a similarly hostile environment. When Abigail's mother gave birth to a new child, her stepfather's cruelty escalated. He began abusing Abigail. The trauma was finally exposed. Abigail was removed from the home and placed into foster care, but the damage had already taken root. Foster care was supposed to be a turning point, a place to heal, but Abigail carried her scars with her. School became an ongoing struggle. She had trouble focusing, lashed out frequently, and reacted violently to the smallest disruptions. Her anger wasn't just surface level. It came from a deep place, a defense mechanism forged by years of trauma. She demanded control in all situations, often exploding when she didn't get her way. Eventually, her behavior led to expulsion, and she was transferred to a school designed for students with serious behavioral issues. She briefly lived with her grandmother, but even that environment proved too volatile. Her grandmother couldn't handle Abigail's unpredictable moods. The girl was just 13 when she was sent back to her biological father, an alcoholic who was in no position to provide stability or guidance. Though Abigail made efforts to attend therapy, her pain remained raw. She began drinking, and cocaine followed. She would later say the banned substance were the only escape from the constant darkness in her mind. By 15, Abigail had attempted to end her own life twice. That year, she met her first boyfriend, and it was her first taste of what she believed love could be. For 7 months, she felt some kind of happiness, but once the relationship ended, she spiraled again, and her next relationship would be even more damaging. At 16, she began seeing a 29-year-old man, an age gap that raised eyebrows, but no red flags stopped the relationship. It lasted 2 years, ending shortly after she turned 18. She officially moved into social housing. It was a modest space, but for Abigail, it was the first time she had a home that felt like hers. That's when she reconnected with Bradley Lewis. They had known each other during their school years, but now, as adults, something more grew between them. Abigail was 19. Bradley was 17. Their relationship moved quickly, and they soon welcomed their first child. Over the next 5 years, 2 more children followed. By 23, Abigail was a mother of 3, and Bradley, just 21, worked full-time as a floor installer. Abigail stayed home, raising their children and trying to build a life. But living on one income was hard. Desperate to contribute financially, she began seeking alternative ways to make money from home. That's when she discovered the world of online adult modeling. Abigail launched an OnlyFans account. Her content was bold, provocative, and quickly became a success. Within a year, she earned £50,000. While her income eventually decreased, it still provided a steady income and a taste of validation she had never known before. But money didn't solve her problems. Behind the scenes, her relationship with Bradley was deteriorating. Their home life became increasingly toxic, defined by frequent arguments and violent outbursts, followed by recurring breakups and reconciliations. Neither seemed able to walk away. Despite the mounting emotional damage, Abigail's rage extended beyond the home. In one disturbing incident, she attacked a woman in a nightclub bathroom, convinced the woman had looked at her the wrong way. The victim was severely beaten, and Abigail was sentenced to 12 months of community service. In her daily life, Abigail was controlling, demanding that everything go her way. She issued orders to Bradley, with zero tolerance for disobedience, erupting if he didn't comply. She craved constant affirmation, from compliments to gifts, and any perceived neglect triggered violent confrontations. Her need for attention was insatiable. The relationship between Abigail and Bradley had long ceased to be healthy. What remained was a cycle of fights, betrayals, and emotional warfare. Most days were marked by shouting matches and cold silences that stretched late into the night. Their children were caught in the middle, silently absorbing the surrounding chaos. From an outsider's perspective, the solution seemed obvious: separation. However, neither Abigail nor Bradley seemed ready to leave. Their relationship was characterized by infidelity. Though they were not in an open relationship, both cheated, both knew about the other's affairs, and both reacted with jealousy. Abigail, in particular, demanded immediate responses to her messages. Any delay triggering paranoia that Bradley was with another woman. Ironically, while she was also seeing other men, their boundaries became even more blurred when they engaged in group intimate encounters. Their situation was not merely dysfunctional, it was explosive. Things deteriorated further when Abigail became pregnant and discovered that Bradley had also fathered a child with another woman. That betrayal intensified an already volatile dynamic. Abigail's rage was relentless. Friends and family on both sides urged them to separate before something irreversible happened. Abigail's parents openly despised Bradley, not only for his repeated infidelities, but also for inappropriate messages he had allegedly sent to Abigail's sister. Bradley's family, meanwhile, had their own reasons to distrust Abigail, especially after she stabbed him in the leg during an argument. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it served as a physical reminder of the turmoil they both refused to escape. Around this time, Abigail's previous assault in the nightclub caught the attention of social services. Authorities ordered a welfare check, concerned for the well-being of the children. The assessment was clear. Abigail and Bradley were living in a toxic and potentially dangerous environment. To avoid losing custody, they agreed to live apart. Bradley moved in with his mother, finding his first sense of peace in years. That brief separation gave Bradley clarity, leading him to seriously consider ending the relationship for good. But when he expressed his doubts to Abigail, her reaction was immediate and severe. She threatened self-harm, an alarming threat given her mental health history. Over time, the threats escalated. She said she would kill the women Bradley had cheated with, the mother of his other child, his own mother, and eventually Bradley himself. By early 2022, Abigail's downward spiral was visible to all. She began posting aggressive and disturbing content on TikTok, airing their dirty laundry with no restraint. She mocked Brad, shared intimate details, and even confessed to violent behavior she had inflicted on Bradley. He felt increasingly trapped. He told friends he feared for his safety, but was too afraid of what Abigail might do if he left. On March 18th, she decided to terminate the pregnancy, a decision Bradley supported afterward. One day later, on March 19th, tensions exploded again. Abigail accused Bradley of cheating, and the fight ended with her stabbing him in the arm. He needed medical treatment, but chose not to report the truth, telling hospital staff it had been an accident. At this time, Abigail messaged a friend, admitting that her relationship had become so dangerous that she believed it would end in one of two ways. Either she would be dead or she would end up in prison. She confessed that she believed herself capable of killing Bradley. Just 6 days later, on March 25th, Abigail and Bradley met in a park for what was intended as a final, honest conversation. Abigail brought a friend, likely to maintain a sense of control or for protection. During the meeting, Bradley told her he was ending the relationship, this time for good. To everyone's surprise, Abigail didn't erupt. She didn't scream or lash out. For once, she remained eerily calm, but with her calmness was never a guarantee of peace. It was often the quiet before a catastrophe. Later that same day, they made plans to meet again. A gathering at a pub was arranged, with a few close friends joining them. Abigail brought their 3 children along, perhaps trying to project a sense of normalcy. They agreed to meet at around 5 p.m., but when that time passed, Bradley still hadn't shown up. By 5:30 p.m., Abigail began firing off angry messages, furious at his tardiness. Her fury was fueled by the alcohol she had already consumed and further amplified by banned substance. The combination only intensified her volatility. When Bradley finally arrived at 7 p.m., he was met not with a smile, but with raw, seething rage. Abigail had convinced herself he'd been with another woman. Bradley retreated to the restroom with a friend, desperate to decompress and speak freely. There, he admitted how lost he felt and how helpless the situation had become. He no longer knew how to reason with Abigail, but even in that small, private space, there was no escape. When Bradley and his friend emerged, Abigail was waiting just outside the door. She exploded, screaming and accusing them of conspiring against her. Before anyone could react, she lunged at Bradley. In front of stunned onlookers, Abigail launched a violent assault. Bradley's friend tried to pull her away to restore calm, but Abigail spat directly in his face. The situation had escalated beyond control. Fearing further violence, Bradley's friends decided to leave. Abigail and Bradley remained, attempting once again to patch things up. Bradley ordered a round of beers, hoping to de-escalate the situation, but Abigail slapped them off the table, sending glass and foam crashing to the floor. Customers looked on in disbelief. Strangers tried to intervene, hoping to prevent further escalation, but Abigail turned on them, too, throwing a drink at one man and spitting in his face. When the man tried to push her away in self-defense, Abigail fell. She immediately called the police to report an assault, omitting the key detail that she had provoked the confrontation. Her children witnessed the entire ordeal, absorbing yet another violent chapter in their already unstable home life. By 8 p.m., Abigail and Bradley and their kids left the pub. A friend they met outside offered them a ride home. On the way back, Bradley made a comment that would later send chills down the spine of everyone who heard it. "I'm already dead," he said, aware of what likely awaited him at home. And he was right. As soon as they stepped through the front door, the argument resumed, louder, angrier, and more volatile than ever. Abigail blamed Bradley for what had happened at the pub, furious that he hadn't defended her against the man she accused of attacking her. At some point during the shouting, Abigail walked into the kitchen and came back holding a knife. Bradley had seen this before. Blades weren't new to their arguments, but this time she didn't hesitate. In one swift, violent motion, Abigail drove the knife directly into his chest. In the background, their 3-year-old son had crept downstairs, drawn by the noise. He witnessed it all. Both Abigail and Bradley froze. The rage disappeared, replaced by stunned silence. Bradley, bleeding heavily, stumbled back into the kitchen and collapsed onto the floor. But instead of immediately calling for help, Abigail panicked. Rather than grabbing the phone, she grabbed cleaning supplies. She put Bradley's blood-stained shirt into the washing machine. She tried to scrub the floor clean. She didn't want anyone to see what she had done, not even herself. This was the third time Abigail had injured Bradley with a knife, but this time she knew it was different. This wound wouldn't fade into a scar. It was too deep. Moments later, hearing the commotion, a neighbor rushed over. She found Abigail distraught, barefoot, wearing a pink dress and sporting a bruise on her arm, but no trace of blood. Bradley, meanwhile, lay motionless on the kitchen floor. Leaning over him to check for a pulse, she felt the faintest trace of breath. With trembling hands, she began performing CPR while still on the phone with emergency services. The operator instructed her to apply direct pressure to the chest wound. As she did, she noticed something deeply alarming. Very little blood was escaping. This was a terrifying sign of internal bleeding, indicating Bradley's body was beginning to shut down. The neighbor attempted to place him in the recovery position, but he was too heavy for her to move alone. Around 8:22 p.m., her husband returned home and immediately sensed that something was wrong next door. When he entered the house, he found his wife desperately trying to keep Bradley alive and took over chest compressions. Time was quickly slipping away. By 8:48 p.m., police had arrived, already spiraling into hysteria. Abigail called a friend, claiming Bradley had harmed himself. She insisted he had tried to take his own life and begged for reassurance that he would survive. The story had already begun to shift. Moments later, paramedics arrived. Bradley, just 22 years old, was rushed to the hospital and taken straight into surgery. But the damage was too severe. The knife had penetrated very deep, straight into his heart. Despite hours of surgical efforts, doctors pronounced him dead. Back at the scene, Abigail White was arrested. But even during her interrogation, she stuck to a version of events that didn't add up. At first, she claimed Bradley had stabbed himself. She then changed her story, claiming he had wrestled the knife from her. Later, she insisted Bradley had grabbed her hand, which was holding the knife, and forced it into himself. The narrative kept shifting, each version seemingly tailored to avoid blame. Unbeknownst to Abigail, there was a silent witness. Her 3-year-old son had seen it all. Incredibly, despite his age, the child was able to give police a clear and damning statement. "Mommy stabbed Daddy." It was a heartbreaking confirmation of what investigators already suspected. The evidence was overwhelming, and eventually, Abigail could no longer deny what she had done. She confessed, but claimed it had been a moment of passion. She insisted she hadn't meant to kill Bradley, only to hurt him in a moment of rage. But one detail was impossible to ignore. Abigail never called an ambulance. While Bradley lay dying on the floor, she chose to mop up his blood, toss his shirt in the wash, and stage the scene. She claimed she'd tried to call for help, but couldn't get a signal. Yet, she managed to contact a friend to spin a story about end his own life. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered chilling internet searches made by Abigail in the days leading up to the murder. She had looked up how to tie a noose and whether someone could die from a broken heart. On March 17th, just 1 week before the killing, she also searched for miscarriage-related topics and information about stabbing incidents. In October 2022, Abigail White stood trial at Bristol Crown Court. The prosecution presented a large amount of evidence. This included security camera footage from the pub concerning TikTok videos she posted, voice messages, and over 200 statements from witnesses. Her plea to downgrade the charge to manslaughter was rejected. She was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 18 years. Psychiatrists testified that Abigail suffers from borderline personality disorder, a diagnosis rooted in the profound trauma of her early life. But mental illness alone couldn't excuse the choices she made. Today, Abigail White remains behind bars. Reports have surfaced suggesting she is in a new relationship. It's a fact that continues to anger many who knew and loved Bradley. Still reeling from the loss, his family expressed what so many felt, that no sentence could truly reflect the life that was stolen. They say they were given their own life sentence, waking up each day to a reality without their son, brother, and father of 3. Bradley's memory, however, lives on. Hundreds attended his funeral, and public memorials now stand in his honor. His kindness, his love for his children, and his enduring popularity are remembered by all who knew him. To them, he is not gone. He is still their son, still a father, still loved, and always will be.